Today I'm with Chris Gerritz. We dig into his career path from training to be an Air Force fighter pilot to running AFCERT to founding his company and eventually getting acquired. We also dig into what is happening in Ukraine and how badly Russia is performing in that theater of war. Lastly, we discuss a group Chris helped start called Thinkers and Drinkers and how both sides of the conflict need to be heard by the other if progress is the goal. With that, please meet Chris Gerritz. Hello and welcome to the RSnake Show. Today I have with me Chris Gerritz. How are you, sir?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming down. Just spent a weekend in Vegas, so...
Yep. We're going to try to keep the voice together for however long this takes.
I lose my voice every time I go. Every single time. I don't know what happens.
Yeah. You do have a certain number of days in Vegas that you can actually do without a significant amount of sleep.
Yeah, I don't know if it's sleep or dehydration or just talking too loud at the bars.
Staying up too late or, weird pumping oxygen into the atmosphere. I don't know what it is, but something about Vegas. I always lose my voice. It's amazing, like 100% of the time. So I also want to point out your new membership into the No Hair Club. Yes. This is new.
Yeah, so your membership card will be shipped out
in
shortly to you. Yes.
Perfect.
What was your big impetus to do it?
Over time, I think, I'm 37, so you start losing the hair and you're like, okay, where does this lead to? And I wanted to know what was like the worst case scenario. So I hacked it off. I was scared. I was like, what did I do? I walked out and the first thing this girl says is like, Daddy? And I was like, oh my God, don't call me that. but maybe it's working.
Wait, was it Daddy or, Daddy?
It's one of those. Not one of those. Well, I was also in Vegas.
I see. Okay.
So,
Okay. All right. Well, all right. That works. For me, it was, I too was losing the hair and I'm like, what am I spending any time on my hair for? I don't get it. Like, I don't need it anymore. I have, a girlfriend. It's not like I'm seeking anybody at the moment. And so it's not like a vanity thing. And also it's wasting my time. And it's just like, screw it. So one day I just buzzed it off and
they have so much technology now, and everyone's always thinking, oh, you just buy this paste or buy this product or pay this amount of money or do a surgery. And then you hear equal number of bad stories about those things.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason I didn't shave it, incidentally, is because I felt it would be more maintenance to have to shave it all the time. So I just buzzed it because I figured, if it grows out, it takes 2 or 3 days to start looking stupid. Oh, well, no big deal. Kind of like shaving a beard or something. So anyway, with that wonderful tangent. So you and I actually kind of have an interesting parallel career in some ways, although not early on. You started in a very different path than I did. So first thing I wanted to talk about was your military history. And specifically, I know you didn't start becoming a pilot. You started more on the information security side, but then you kind of decided you want to get into being a pilot. So can you talk about that and sort of your path there?
I don't think it was planned. Like none of this was planned, but my career did take a few turns here and there, and it ended up being an incredible experience. But 2003, I joined right out of high school, and this is like right after 9/11, so that kind of inspired me. I went into the delayed entry program pretty early, as soon as I could, just because of that whole situation. And I was always technical. I was a nerd. I played video games. I mean, huge LAN parties. We were not the cool kids back then.
Now we are.
Yeah, now we are. So I think back then, so I got admitted into computer maintenance, system administration, Active Directory, stuff like that. So all of the nuts and bolts of making a network work, especially a large network on a base. I was deployed immediately into Kuwait and part of a 3-man shop taking care of 1,500 systems. And so it was a lot of experience for a young man like me to do that. And so that lasted a few years until, my commander basically said, hey, you're high speed. We should put you into a program. What's your aspirations? And I said, well, I want to be an officer. I want to be a leader, maybe even be a pilot. I've never dreamt of it, but like maybe. And so he put me into a program. I got admitted. They sent me to school.
Is that partially because one of the pathways to being promoted is to have combat experience? Is that what was going through your head, or?
No, I think I was deployed early, but I didn't really have a whole lot of combat experience. I mean, back then we were in Kuwait. Kuwait was pacified for the most part. The only time I was ever shot at, I was in a bus with no weapon. So I never had the real stuff. Can we cuss on this?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I was not in the shit. Okay. So I would never say that I was.
Yeah.
There's people who go, I was in Iraq. Yeah. You were in a bunker. That's kind of my experience too. So I was down there doing that. But no, it's just a push for me to always be involved, be a leader, be something, and to be useful. And so just having that drive made my commanders and my supervisors say, this person has aspirations to do more, and here's a couple paths you can choose from. And I said, make me an officer, let's go. And so I became an officer, and I got an electrical engineering degree. And they said, well, you're going to go to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and you're going to work on lasers. And I go, oh yeah, I want to work on lasers. That would be great.
That sounds cool.
Yeah, except for Air Force officers in those programs are contract officers. They don't actually work on lasers. They just manage contracts and let Raytheon and these other big companies go and do that. So I was like, that sounds the most boring thing I can think of. I'm not going to be a leader. I can't do anything cool. What are my options to get out of that?
The leader of contractors.
So they said, apply to the pilot program. If you get admitted, they can't touch you. So I did. I got admitted, went to pilot training in Del Rio.
Cool. And so you did that for a little while, the pilot training, and you were flying the equivalent of F5s, or is that right?
Well, no, the training program kicks you from a small aircraft like this. It's called a DA-20, little lawnmower engine. Thing could literally lose its motor and land slower than your car drives, because that's its glide path.
Sure.
So you do that until you get used to it. Once it stops making you feel like you're going to die, they move you up to a bigger aircraft that will make you feel like you want to die. And then
just keep rinse and repeat.
Yeah. And then you get used to that. And then they put you in a faster plane. So I worked my way up through the T6, a lot of hours on that. I did end up getting a flight, some flights in a T-38 and a F-15. But those were always kind of like backseaters. They were not like me flying it 100%.
So that's you just learning what all the controls were and how the comms work and all that stuff. Yeah, gotcha. Cool. So then that was over.
Short-lived.
Yeah, short-lived.
Very short-lived. Yeah, at age, I guess I was 27, I got diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder that attacked the nerves in my hand. So I have the inability to do very specific functions with my left hand, like buttoning buttons, turning knobs, and manipulating small things, there's a lot of those in the plane, it turns out. So, in fact, even my shirts here, I don't tell people this a lot, but it's kind of funny when I show people, I'm like, I don't button buttons. They're like, you're wearing a button shirt right now. No, I have a zipper.
Oh, wow.
All my button shirts have zippers.
Oh, interesting.
I hide them.
I just thought it was going to be magnets and holding it all together.
Oh, that would be a good one too.
Right? Yeah. It's kind of like the invisible pearl snaps or something. That's cute. I love it. All right. So tell me about pulling G's. Is that how do you even learn how to do that?
I passed out one time.
Yeah.
We were, that was in the F-15. I was that instructor pilot was mean.
Was he trying to make you pass out?
Yes. Yeah. And they usually do, because they're like, oh, this is your dollar ride. Your dollar ride's the first ride in that aircraft. And they go, this is your dollar ride? This is great. Okay. So we pulled a bunch of G's. I was like struggling. I used to think you're just sitting in a chair. The Marines will always go, oh, you just sit in a chair. Sit in an F-15 doing 7 Gs, please. You will sweat more than you've ever sweat in your life. You weigh a lot when you're under that kind of pressure. And so we were hitting those Gs in a training mission. And I said, man, how many Gs did we pull right there? And he goes, we maxed out at about 7. I'm like, what's 9 feel like? He turns their aircraft upside down, yanks it, and I just pass right out.
Thankfully, he didn't pass out.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Did you see the recent Top Gun, out of curiosity?
The best.
Was it pretty good?
It was so good.
So from a flight mechanics perspective, that was all real,
Yes.
except for he was a backseater, I think.
Yeah.
Or they had a modified version with 2-seaters.
Yeah, the F-A-18, which is a Navy aircraft, does have a 2-seat version and a 1-seat version. And they pretended they were all 1-seat versions or 2-seat versions, depending on what their configuration was.
Right.
But they all had a camera crew in the front.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I don't know how they configured that, because there's not a lot of room in there to do that.
Yeah, right? The guy's flying with his head over the side. Yeah, that was pretty impressive.
Yeah, when you get admitted to the to pilot training, whether it's the Navy or the Air Force, it's a ritual to go watch Top Gun. And I think Top Gun 2 is the new ritual.
Yeah, I think so.
So
yeah, maybe both.
Yeah.
I just remember I used to. So I think it's worth talking a little bit about Ukraine in this context, since you are a pilot.
Well, I don't fly much anymore.
Yes. In the context of Ukraine, I think there's. I remember when I was a kid, I used to play this flight simulator, and the whole thing was like flying over Russian airspace and blowing up MiGs as they were flying off. And one of the air bases that I remember distinctly to this day was Kyiv. And so you're flying over Kyiv, blowing up airplanes, and it's a weird experience watching this thing happen over
Unfold.
in Ukraine, right?
Yeah. But I mean, the number of video games and movies about the USSR and Russia mostly involved Eastern Europe,
right?
And now Eastern Europe is not them anymore.
Right, that's right.
You know, so these are now friendly countries.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so they were Russia territory or USSR at the time. So that was interesting. So I kind of want to get your take a little bit on, there's a bit of a argument between the right and the left about whether we should be there. And so as best as I can, I'm going to steel man both arguments, and I want to get your take on it. So I think the right is concerned that there is a strong possibility that NATO might accidentally get involved. They don't want NATO involved, but they might get involved. And there's every reason in the world that Russia believes that NATO will, if it hasn't already. And also, if Ukraine were to join NATO, now you have NATO country right on their border, and they don't want that. And so it makes sense why they might get very provocative or even go thermonuclear if they felt so provoked. So let's not do that. Sort of like, let's save the world. And then also it's expensive and a bunch of other stuff. But I think that's the core major thing that they're concerned with.
Yeah, the escalation.
The escalation issue. And on the left, I think the argument is, yes, but we need, that might all be true, but they're probably not going to do it. And more importantly, are we just going to let them roll over Ukraine and crush this country? And you know, these people who aren't.
I mean, that's what we did with Crimea and everything else.
That's exactly what happened to Crimea. And look what happened. They got completely taken over. And then there's a even more interesting argument that I saw. It was basically going through the economics of the value to the United States in terms of letting this happen. And the best answer I saw was things like, well, for every dollar we put in, we make something like 100. I don't think it's exactly 100, but some amount back, fairly high ROI. I forget what the actual number was. And one example of a hidden value that we get on top of all the actual value we get of degrading our enemy for every dollar we spend, is all of the allies in the region are watching this play out. And they're watching U.S. or Western weapons against, Eastern weapons. And they're just seeing absolute decimation and complete lack of good doctrine, and the equipment is failing for ordinary reasons like rusting out and getting stuck in mud, and electronics warfare is not even being used, which I do want to talk about in a second. So if you were going to buy weapons, would you buy Western weapons or would you buy Eastern weapons? And now they might be a little cheaper. You might get them like half off or a tenth off, but is it worth that? Is it really worth it? And I think what's going to end up happening, and I think this article was spot on, is pretty much any buyers of weapon systems in the world is going to be taking a strong, hard look at that and going, I don't think I want Russian weapons. I mean, unless I have no choice at all, I don't think that's the wise choice. So which of those sets of arguments do you personally align with, or do you have any feelings about that?
I don't know. It's a very complex situation. I think that we often... I spent 10 years in the military, and certainly after getting out, it's difficult to be the 100% patriot, we're always right kind of person, that's who I was when I joined. When I joined up, that's who I was. Hoorah, let's do it. Listen to Toby Keith. But after a while, you start realizing like the world is a very complex place, and things aren't very, cut and dry. We all want it to be cut and dry. We want decisions to be made that are very decisive. I I think one of our pitfalls right now is we're looking at this scenario and saying, what historical context or what historical example is this? Is this Crimea? Should we do something? Or is this Vietnam? Should we not do something? Is this a scenario where we're going to have something brand new and we're going to have World War III? Like, we're all trying to figure that out right now. I don't know if anybody has that answer. So I'm probably on the side that says these guys have, been an antagonist, if not an enemy, but an antagonist for a long time. And, does this benefit us? I don't know. I don't think war benefits anybody in the long run, but letting a warmonger go, run amok is also not good for anybody either. So I'm probably there. I think the technology question's very interesting. I think that's like the most interesting thing about this is what new technologies, after 20 years of insurgency combat that we've been exposing ourselves to, and we've been building 5th generation fighters that have no use in those scenarios. So after 20 years, what does a new war look like with real countries? We're seeing that right now, and we're also seeing how big of a pufferfish that someone like Russia is. Like, they're not doing as well.
So I heard a really good explanation about why that might be true, and many sub-reasons, obviously. But one is because they were originally a communist-driven organization where literally all decisions had to flow up to the very top, all of them. And which is a massive problem. Even if you start delegating, you're like, well, okay, it won't be me. I'll be an oligarchy. I'll have a bunch of generals beneath me who make these individual decisions. The problem with that is now you have to have the generals really, really close to the line to make any sense of what's going on and make decisions, which means your generals are in harm's way, which means that you're going to be able to kill their generals. And now what happens? Yeah. And we've killed something crazy, like 30 or 40 generals or something.
We, you mean Ukraine?
Well, the Western world. Let's put it that way. Yeah. Maybe I do mean we. I don't know. Yeah, it's a weird. How you align. Yeah, it's a weird demarcation there. Yeah,
the proxy wars usually are.
That's exactly what this is. It's a proxy war. Thank you for saying it out loud. And if that's the case, it's very difficult to say. Because the Western world is like, well, every group is their own group. They do their own thing. If they ask for stuff, it gets dropped to them immediately. It doesn't really matter. They need it. If it's available, give it to them. And, clean up later, figure out whether they really needed it later. Court-martial them like well afterwards. Don't worry about it today. Like just, they said that they needed helicopter support, give it to them. If it was a practical joke, fine, get them, arrest them later, but let's just assume it isn't, right?
Yeah. We give weapons to some weird people.
Yeah. Yes, we do. One thing I thought was kind of interesting is, as you said, we have all this amazing like fighter squadrons and whatever, and we're giving a lot of weaponry over, but we're not giving this 5th generation fighters. We're not doing that. In fact, really, fighter warfare, other than the first handful of weeks in the war, just doesn't really exist at the moment. In fact, I've been watching the last handful of weeks, and it's gone down significantly in terms of how many weapons that are flying are getting destroyed, other than missiles. And so I guess my first question around that is, why do you think that's happening? Like, what is causing it such a bad airspace that both sides aren't flying?
Yeah, I guess that's like something I'm not an expert on. So I'd be hard pressed to give a really, an accurate answer. I have been watching on, various social media. There's some really cool reporters out there that are on the ground, giving some really cool information. Like you just talked about, they're not using really advanced fighters or even the best stuff that we have. Why aren't we giving them that? Well, one of the scenarios was they were having a hard time procuring aircraft for them for Ukraine from the West because their pilots are only trained on Russian aircraft, and we have to go procure old Russian aircraft that they are trained on, that they have a supply chain to fix and to support, that they their missiles will even fit on. Which means they're not getting F-16s. They're not getting our stuff, even if we wanted to give it to them. So we got to go find these things and figure out who can give it to them. There's stories of them saying, hey, NATO can't get involved in procuring and giving them that. So we're going to just put one on the other side of the border and let some people run over, take it apart, and pull it back over to the other side of the border. And like, well, I just left it on the porch, and they took it.
Why did someone steal it? I mean, the keys were in it, but I figured no one would steal it. So we have seen quite a few drones, though. And there have been a few kind of large loitering drones out there, but not many. The bulk of them have been very small, personal drones, and extremely effective. Yeah, extremely effective. One I saw, it was a really interesting video. It was a little drone, like a very small DJI type drone, incredibly small, so small that it had a little grenade under it that looked large. And it flew over battle space, and the caption under it was, "We dropped this down the chimney of this Russian thing." And so whether that's true or not, I have no idea, because it's very hard to tell in the video. But what they did do is they dropped it down a pipe that was just slightly larger than the grenade. And they got down to ground level, so they got it perfectly meshed up with the pipe, and they dropped it, and it went down that pipe, and they flew the drone away, and it blew up. That is such insane accuracy. There's really no way to beat that. I mean, you're not going to be able to drop a grenade down a 3-inch pipe without that sort of technology.
I mean, have you ever seen the drone racing? The drone racing is incredible. They have, they're going through the smallest little rings. And we're seeing, this is like I talked about, this is a case where what does post-insurgency war look like between two real countries? And drones are a significant portion of it. I think that's only going to get more and more. And our expertise in cybersecurity is going to come into that because they're networked, machines.
Yes.
And so drones, I think it's also going to make warfare more prevalent. Like, we're going to do this more because we're not losing lives. All we're doing is losing some money, if it's $1,000 per drone. So it's a very interesting thing to watch right now. Like, how does the future war get fought? It's going to get fought by these drones. It's going to get fought by high precision aircraft and taking out exactly what you want to take out.
Exactly. Another thing I thought was pretty interesting about the first handful of days of the war was there was a lot of concern about electronic warfare. First of all, hacking was a big concern initially, and to some extent even now. But another thing was shutting down cells systems, or shutting down Wi-Fi, or shutting down any electronic communications. Even going up to satellites communications. Certainly, like short and long broadband type comm systems or whatever. And first of all, we captured the critical one, the one that everyone was concerned about, the thing. And it was actually funny because online people were like, "Hey, what's this thing that we captured?" And everyone's like, "Oh, that's the thing. That's that one box that the Russians have that everyone's freaked out about." And everyone's sort of joking, like, it'll be about 10 seconds before some people parachute in for that. They're definitely going to want to see what's on the inside of that thing. But the rationale I heard about why they're not using it is they haven't trained to use it. So they have it. It's in their arsenal. It exists, and it probably does everything everyone is concerned that it can do. But it also shuts down their connections as well. And so all the generals on the ground, they need to be able to reach their troops who are, a couple hills away or whatever. And the only way to do that is to use their communications that they've got. And they're just jamming themselves every time they turn that thing on.
Right.
And the US and other Western allies train very heavily to have a situation in which they cannot use those things. So we intentionally flip it on, or pretend like we're flipping it on, and shut everything off. Like, okay, you're going to have to function on your own with no communications whatsoever.
Bring out the grease pencils. You have no computers.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And as a result, we were perfectly prepared for a scenario on our side of the fence. Not to say the Ukrainians were, but we were always ready for it. But the Russians, they had this awesome equipment and they were not ready to use it. So it just sat there. Yeah. And so all the communication systems basically kept running. In fact, the Russians started using Ukrainian cell networks because their own networks weren't working very well. That's incredible to me.
Yeah, I think we debated this a long time, being part of the Air Force Cyber Command, on what a war would look like in the cyberspace. Like, would this be a highly prevalent way to fight war? Would it even be available? And one of the main theories that we had was, yes, it will be available because it's a battle space that we both need. It's like, don't jam all of the frequencies because we need those two to communicate with our troops. So we just leave it open. Now we're spying, we might do targeted denial, but that space, that battle space, whether it's on the wire, whether it's in the air, whether it's in the internet, we don't want to deny it because we all rely on it. Mm-hmm. If there is a significant advantage on one side than the other, maybe then a denial of all of it is required.
So I really like that answer. Did you ever meet Robert E. Lee? Is that name ring a bell? Other than the Confederate general?
Yes.
So a security guy, and him and another guy, Jack, invented this thing called Sockstress, which was able to take down basically anything running TCP/IP, which is effectively everything. Mm-hmm. I've talked about this a little bit on the show before, but they realized at one point that they were able to take down data centers, or they said this could theoretically take down data centers. And so they got a lot of negative publicity about this, and people were like, why are you talking about this? Like it could do this, blah, 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 blah. And so I took him aside one day and I'm like, so why did you say this could take down data centers? Like, Robert, how do you think we found out that this thing actually does work? Because we took down our own data center and the one we were attacking. And so we were kind of doing a thought exercise about what would happen if you were to take this thing and weaponize it and put it out in some malware and just propagate it out to a couple thousand machines across the internet and just have them probe every major network. And it would shut down the entire internet. But we couldn't figure out a way to monetize that. And that was our...
Yeah, what use is that?
Yeah, there's no utility of it other than just chaos, right? Yeah. So maybe as a terrorist attack or something, but zero economic upside. Mm-hmm. And from a nation state perspective, you're just hobbling your own capability as well. So I think that's analogous here. I think you're absolutely right. They were very much more concerned about their own communications than anybody else's. Mm-hmm. It's kind of crazy.
It's interesting.
So the other thing that I've talked about a couple times, and I wanted to get your take on it, was GIS art for artillery. Have you heard of this?
No, not really.
This is fantastic. So apparently some reporter found this thing. I forget
GIS as in Global Information Cert?
As in mapping software.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. So some researcher found this out because some security company claimed that this piece of software had been compromised, and it turned out it probably hadn't been compromised. So, but anyway, that caused this reporter, to take a look at it. Like, what is this thing? I've never even heard of it. And then secondly, that same reporter also noticed that there was this very specific incident where this video of there was something that these airplanes or whatever wanted to blow up, but instead of blowing up the thing that they were after, they blew up kind of nearby. All these bombs started blowing up, or like missiles started dropping or whatever in this one specific place. But it's not like they missed in the sense that they all were exactly where they were supposed to be, except where the target was actually just over here. So their coordinates were wrong, but their aim was perfect, if that makes sense, which is usually it's the other way around. Like normally you have the coordinates right.
Does that mean it was intentional?
No, what it means is they had old, crappy side-scanning radar from these old Sioux aircraft or these old Russian aircraft. So their centroid is known to be wrong. Mm-hmm. So he kind of deduced that that's what's going on. But he's like, okay, but why are they so accurate? Like that makes sense why the centroid error would be off, because that's just these kind of old radar systems. That's how they work. But why is everyone so accurate? How are they able to get all these things going? And these are different types of explosions too. It's not just like one thing. It's like a couple different types of explosions going off. And so he figured it out. It's a software. It's GIS for artillery. And what it is effectively Uber for dropping bombs. So you basically say, hey, there's a target right here at this coordinates. Who has bombs or a grenade or, a rocket or whatever, missile or whatever? Just someone drops some ordnance right here, right now. And so somebody might say, no, sorry, I'm tasked to do something else. Yes, I have the ability to do it, but I'm not going to because I've got an important mission. But otherwise, if you got a cannon nearby, like, oh yeah, sure, we'll drop some bombs in there or whatever. I'll drop some ordnance in this way or that way or whatever. And one of the advantages of that is many of the Russian defenses is set up to protect in the case of multiple launches. So if they see many things coming from one location, they're like, okay, that's a high value target, start dropping bombs there. But if there's just one missile going off or just one cannon going off or something, it's just not enough. It just doesn't look like a juicy enough target from their targeting acquisition software. And so they're able to be extraordinarily, like ridiculously accurate, especially with HIMARS and some of these others, where they can basically drop, 10, 20 different things from different locations, all in one place, coming from different directions. And there's just nothing you can do about it. I mean, there's nowhere to run. And with a combination of drones for the targeting acquisition, this is effectively a done war. I mean, we're looking at the total decimation of the Russian army unless they pull a hat out, some sort of magic trick or something.
They got a lot of army. They can keep shoving in.
Yeah, I mean that's what they would have to do, or nuclear weapons or some other mass destruction or something, which we don't want. And so I think the Republicans are right to be concerned about that particular issue. But it is interesting to watch this all play out. And from what I can tell, this software is ultimately unique. I've not heard about it anywhere else. I've never seen anyone else reference anything close to it. But it is absolutely being heavily used by Ukraine and absolutely going to be used in the battlefield in the future.
Definitely.
It's just a genius idea. It's so simple.
I mean, it's the consumerization of the military, right? You take technologies like Uber or even concepts like that, and you say, how can we adapt that? Remember when we were doing, mass collection, like how do you search all that? Well, let's contact Google. They know how to search. How do I get, independent organizations to deliver something that I need over here? Well, Uber, let's Uber Eats some artillery.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think it's really fascinating to watch it play out. And I think you're right. It is this sort of, how do we hybridize what we know works really well, as opposed to the Russian model, which is we have a general who gets to decide who gets to get blown up today or not, or he's taking a nap. We can't disturb him right now. It's like, no. We need bombs here now. It's almost the exact opposite doctrine.
Yeah. Have you heard of how they do reporting in the Russian military? It's called picture reporting. And so I was reading a lot about how they do reporting, and some of them, their military units were reporting back false information. And they were doing that because, there's not a whole lot of motivation in some of these units to do what they want to do. So if they're told, you must take this hill, in order for them to get the accolades from the higher command and to go to all the way up to Putin, they have to take a picture of them taking that hill. So often they'll say, well, I don't want to take that hill. I don't have the manpower to take that hill. You haven't given me the tools. I don't have any ammo. So they'll just send 3 people up there at night, sneak up there, take the photo, put the flag in, take it down, and run away. And so apparently there's been
like counting coup or something.
there's been reports of this multiple times on a lot of these the channels that I watch, of these picture reports being forged. Just send people in to get the picture, don't even hold it, and then leave. And then higher command thinks we have that territory. No, you don't. You took a picture. Or, hey, do we have enough ammo? Well, here's a picture of the warehouse. It's got a bunch of AK-47s. No, those AK-47s were sold on the black market to people who wanted bump stocks and like fully automatic weapons in Western countries. That's an empty warehouse.
Yeah.
But there's an old picture that you sent them.
Yeah, I think the whole thing about the Ukrainians, some carcasses of the Russian soldiers, and they were pulling apart their equipment or whatever just to kind of see what everything they had. They're looking at their kit, making sure they understand what's in there. They found that a lot of the C4 was just blocks of wood. The low-cost bidder just decided to replace their plastic explosives with wood.
Yeah,
like little blocks of wood, which is fantastic. I mean, that just shows the level of corruption that was super pervasive. And another example of that I thought was really interesting was there was some mechanic or something who worked fairly high up in mechanics inside the U.S. Army. So he was in charge of something like 1,000 tanks or something and making sure that they're all running. He said one of the things that he noticed very early on in the war was many of the Ukrainian pictures that were of Russian tanks in the mud, or these like kind of Humvee variants or whatever. The tracked vehicles, not Humvees. All these tracked vehicles, they had these kind of rust patterns or brake patterns that was very indicative of something that's a very common problem with all tracked vehicles, but is easily identified and easily fixed if you know what you're looking for. And so what that means is that literally no one is looking at any of those things, because somebody should have ran the track over one time, make sure that it doesn't have that rust pattern or whatever is causing that problem, or breakage of the plastics on it or whatever, and make sure everything's up. If it's not, then you pull it. It's a huge pain in the butt, but you pull it all apart, put it all back together with the next one that's working properly. And then the thing will work for another 4 or 5 years, no problem. But if you don't do that, and he's like, it's an enormous pain. It really is. You got to go through every single one of those, and you have to do it on a regular basis. So you're never really done with this job. You just keep going through it. And when you're done, you just start over. So it's the job that never ends. But it's obvious that the Russians are not maintaining thousands and thousands and thousands of these tanks. And so when winter is really upon us again, which is, February timeframe, when it really starts snowing, February, March timeframe, you're going to see that a lot of those things get stuck in the mud again for the same reasons that the tracks are falling off or breaking or whatever. This all points to this level of corruption within the Russian government, and sort of how they function compared to Western militaries that I think they're going to have to take a very long, hard look at.
So this is an area that the amount of hours that we have in the plane, for instance, is significantly higher than our partner countries that partner with us. When we do NATO training in Texas. We bring pilots from Italy and from Germany and from France to fly the same aircraft that we fly. But we are not on the same level when we're doing those missions, when we're doing red flag. They do have good pilots, but most of their pilots do not get the type of hours that we get. If you're flying an F-16 in Arizona, you're doing a mission every Friday, every Thursday. You're planning that week, you fly that mission, you fly a sortie, it's going to be 3 hours. It costs tens of thousands of dollars an hour just in fuel, let alone maintenance. I mean, they tear those planes apart and put them back together all the time. The Italian military doesn't do that. They don't have the luxury of flying every week. And when they do fly, they're not flying the mission aircraft, because the mission aircraft costs $100,000 an hour to go put it in the air. So they're flying other aircraft just to maintain their qualifications. And you'll see that in the Russian military. You'll see that in other areas of the world. Nobody has the amount of money that we spend to maintain our equipment, to make sure it is combat worthy, and to make sure that our pilots and our people know how to use it. Like, it is significantly different, and you don't know just how different it is until you've been in a classroom with all of your partner countries. And I mean, I had 2 pilots from Afghanistan, and just the difference between schooling, it wasn't a language barrier. Like, the things that they knew and were trained on were completely different, and these were their brightest stars. And so, that's something that I learned.
They're Top Guns.
Yeah.
Wow. That's really interesting. I mean, I've heard similar stories about the amount of, rounds fired by their expert marksmen compared to ours, or their rounds fired, even just grunts coming off the line. A lot of them have maybe fired 2 rounds total out of their guns, maybe just like one, and then another one to make sure to give them feedback on the first one. And that's it. No body armor, sometimes no helmets, or if the helmets they do exist, they're World War II helmets, just repainted. So I think it's very interesting to see that all playing out. One last thing about the Ukraine thing while we're talking. I saw Letterman and Zelensky on David Letterman's new show talking, and it was kind of an unremarkable thing, so I'm not recommending it or anything. But one thing I thought was interesting is they did the entire hour-long segment or whatever, or the bulk of it, inside of a inside of a subway station. And so the subway station was still operational, so it was still going. You could still hear it. And, but during the episode, you heard the air raid sirens going off. And so I just wanted to get your take on what you think the upside and downside of hitting the civilian population is from Putin's perspective. Like, why bother?
Well, I don't believe that civilians should be involved in those types of things at all. I think that's just a moral, failing of doing that. But also, when you're losing or when you're on the defense, sometimes that's all you have. You got to operate out of a civilian building. You got to operate out of a subway. And for, during the insurgency era, that's all they could do. They knew we had restrictions against hitting schools, so they'd go hide their weapons in schools. Yeah, there is a moral failing in that, but also they're trying to, defend their country. So it's difficult. Anytime you have urban combat, you're going to run into that fact that there's going to be people there. Whenever we went into cities in Iraq, we would send out leaflets saying, hey, we're going through. If you're here, you're a combatant. Mm-hmm. And we'll give you a few days to pack your stuff. But if you're still here when we come in, you're a combatant.
You're fair game.
Yeah. I don't think a country like Russia has the moral ground to go and do that, because it is a risk. If you go and tell them when you're coming, 3 days ahead, mm-hmm. That's a pretty big risk when you're on equal footing or even like on the back foot mm-hmm. in a war. So even if they did have that moral aptitude to go do that, should they? No, you're going to run your troops into a trap.
Mm-hmm. Into a wall.
It's difficult.
Yeah. All right. So then you changed your career from a pilot to in the Air Force CERT, right?
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk a little?
Cybersecurity.
Yeah. So back into cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Full circle.
Yeah. Started my career in computers and networks, network security. I did secure communication before going to pilot training. So pilot training was a short 2 years for me. And I got transferred over when I got diagnosed with my autoimmune disorder that hurt my hand. They put me in San Antonio. San Antonio has Air Force Cyber Command and a lot of other assets. NSA Texas is there. There's quite a bit of cyber stuff there. In fact, like if most people think of Fort Meade, they think of Baltimore. San Antonio has pretty much a copy of most of that capability. And so that was an interesting area. I was actually assigned to the Wounded Warriors at Fort Sam Houston, but I was working day to day for Air Force Cyber Command, and they put me in one of their units. Actually, super interesting story of how I even got into it. Because when I reported into the Wounded Warriors, they said, well, what's my schedule? I don't have a job anymore. I can't fly. I said, well, go to your doctor when you need to. Well, that's maybe every 2 weeks right now. They got to figure out what to do with me. The bureaucracy of the military has to figure out what to do with me, and that's going to take a while. In fact, it took like 2 years for them to figure out that they're going to medically retire me. Mm-hmm. But in the meantime, I went to go look for a job because they said, well, we can give you a job, but it's going to be like guarding the gate or something stupid, and you're the only officer in the Wounded Warriors here. So, go, if you want to go find one, we'll write it up for you.
Sure.
So I ended up just marching my ass down to what we call Security Hill on Lackland Air Force Base. And that's, I did the little Google search trying to find, okay, where's the administrative office? Where's the wing? Weirdly, they didn't put any of that on there. It's not on the internet at the time. Mm-hmm. Any of these secret organizations, it turns out, are not on Google. So I had a hard time. I ended up finding the wing building, and I was stationed in a bunch of different places, and the wing building's usually an administrative office. It's not in a SCIF. It's not in a really high security environment. This entire building was a SCIF, which is the highest classification you can have outside of Washington, D.C. and the White House. Mm-hmm. And so here I am, little lieutenant, knocking on the door of this big vault, asking, hey, I need a job. And of course, no one's answering me. And this guy in a suit comes up behind me and he says, sir, can I help you? You were knocking on the door of a SCIF. I go, well, I'm, with the Wounded Warriors. I used to be a pilot. I'm looking for a job. I'm an electrical engineer. Got some skills.
This is very strange.
I just want to give my resume to the wing admin to see if there was any openings or anything like where I can go and help. And he just goes, oh, well, I'm an electrical engineer. Come on in. He just signs me into the SCIF. Huh. Barely know my name. Signs me in, rolls right past the wing admin, barges into the general's door. General stands up for him, hangs up the phone. He says, I got to go. And he says, what can I do for you, Rich? I'm like, who is this guy? Like, why is the general, being deferential to him? And he just says, hey, do you want a free engineer in one of your units? And he goes, I'll take a free engineer. We're down on engineers. So he's like, give him your resume. And he walks out the door. And so I'm like, General, who was that? Oh, that was the CIO of the Air Force. He's here for like a day. He just went out to check his phone, text his wife. So just like right place, right time.
Yeah, no
and
kidding.
He ended up taking my resume and saying, "Oh, actually, we do need some electrical engineers. How long are you here for? I don't know. It might take a year for these people to figure out what to do with me. Just find me a place where I can be useful. And this is the kind of stuff I like. I like cybersecurity stuff." And so he put a bid out to all of his units in San Antonio, and I got placed with the premier defensive unit, the Air Force CERT, the AFCERT. And I spent...
That is a weird story.
A little under 5 years there.
Did you ever re-meet that CIO?
No, it was such a fleeting moment. Like, I don't even know who it was.
It's so funny. So then the way I remember this story is then at some point you did some sort of war game against the NSA. Is that right?
We did. Yeah, it wasn't official, but we do a lot of war games. And so that's, for the longest time, I never talked about it publicly just because I didn't know if it was classified. It's definitely not classified. These are all unclassified things.
Sure.
But it's also like sensitive.
Yeah, sure.
But it's been over a decade.
There's millions of people going to watch. It's fine.
Yeah. But yeah, we do lots of different exercises in cybersecurity, and they all have different names. But a lot of times the opposition forces is going to be taken by the Air Force Red Team or the NSA Red Team, which is the top Red Team in the military and the government.
You might have to explain Red Team.
Yeah, Red Team is going to be is basically the bad guys whenever you're hacking. So if you ever seen the trope red versus blue, two people fighting, there's always a blue team and a red team. The blue team is the defenders, and the red team is the aggressors or the attackers. So in cybersecurity, in cyber missions, whenever we're trying to, if we're participating in a Pacific theater thing, we're saying, hey, let's go deploy our aircraft to Hawaii or to Guam, and let's simulate a war with some large Eastern country, Eastern Asian country.
Sure.
So let's simulate that war, send our planes up. And there's a cyber component where opposition forces acts as the cyber arm of a bad team and attempts to hack into our systems to send the tanker to the wrong place so that our planes fall out of the sky. And if they can do that, then they've created an effect in cyberspace. And so our job as defenders was to stop them from doing that. And so these things happened probably every quarter. Different units did different things, but we had some really, really big ones. And whenever they got a big one and we needed to simulate a really powerful enemy, we would use the NSA Red Team to do that. And so...
And you won.
That one, yeah, they wouldn't say we won one, but we definitely won. That was an interesting one. And it didn't start out it wasn't an official mission. It wasn't official at all. In fact, we had started experimenting early. This is like 2011 timeframe. We were experimenting with some techniques to try to find nation state level hackers because we just believed they got to be in here. Like they know too much. They got to be in our networks. They know too much. So let's go find them.
I mean, the CIO just let me in the building. So
right. Yeah, let's not throw them under the bus too much. So that mentality is called hunting. Defending is a reactionary thing, especially in cybersecurity. You're always reactionary. I'm going to put my wall up. Whenever someone breaches the wall, I got to go respond to it. We're always reactionary. Whenever we're being proactive on the defensive side, we call that threat hunting or hunting. And so we had an entire hunt team designated to go find this invisible bad guy that we just assumed had to be in our networks hidden from us. And so we were deploying these new techniques, and we ended up finding somebody. We found a very large infection. We found it on 100 different systems on 30 plus installations throughout the world, whether it's Pacific theater, European theater, and we all connected them all together. This is one actor who owns a significant portion of the Air Force network. Who are these people? And so we put together a little crack team to go figure it out. And so we assumed it had to be someone big, had to be like a Russia, a North Korea, a China. Back in 2011, we were really worried about North Korea, Iran, China. Russia, not as much. So we assumed it was one of them until we got a cease and desist order that says, stop removing our malware from a 3-letter agency. Said, we deploy that during exercises. Whenever we're acting as opposition forces, we attack and we deploy malware and stuff. And you are currently burning, distributing, government property and giving it to research partners to go figure out what this stuff is. And they shouldn't have access to it. This is us. So please stop. And so I think they often do this sometimes when they have, when red teams get their techniques kind of burned, they say, well, you don't distribute that too far, because then I can't simulate a bad guy that you don't know much about, because now you know too much.
Right.
It's hard to simulate. So they're very protective of their tradecraft. They're very protective of how they attack. And when in terms of like the NSA red team, sometimes they're using knowledge that the NSA has, because they happen to sit in the same building.
Right.
So let's not go and distribute that too widely. So the cease and desist made sense from their end.
Sure.
What ended up happening in 2011 for the particular thing that you're talking about, that we've discussed before, that particular mission, we decided to look into the actual legality of, can they compromise this many of our systems, and do we have to let them? And what we found was, yes, they do have authority to go breach our networks during these exercises. They do have the authority to kind of leave it there if they need it for a future exercise.
Sure.
But we don't have to let them. And so we just decided, hey, let's take all these new techniques and this threat hunting concept that we were building and figure out, how would we remove a really sophisticated actor? And I think the NSA counts as a really sophisticated actor.
Sure does.
Let's go and remove them. Let's see how fast we could do it. Let's see if we could really find it all. And let's see if the NSA has to call us and say, hey, can we get back in your network? Mm-hmm. That would be a really nice position to be in. And so that whole experiment was just like, during the exercise, how do we remove a really, really bad actor?
That's great. So the way I remember this story, you telling me, this is quite a bit ago, so I might have misremembered it. You actually took some of those lessons learned from that end when you left the military. That's how you decided, okay, I think we can do this. I think we can turn this into an actual company.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Medical retirement kind of like pushes you in a certain direction. Mm-hmm. I did stay on as a civilian for a little bit, but one of the things that really occurred to me when I started interviewing after I was getting medically retired and leaving the military, I was interviewing with different organizations and realizing nobody was being proactive in cybersecurity. Everyone was very reactive. Everyone was very architecture based. I'm a cybersecurity guy at Bank of America. I install firewalls. I configure things. Once it's secure, it's configured. So incident response was call a third party. Break glass in emergency. Being proactive was non-existent. And there was a lot of questions that I was asking, and the answers I was getting was, there's no commercial application for that. That's a lot of money wasted for something that might not be there. Like, we're not like the military. You can't just assume that there's some bad guy in our network, because we're just trying to do business.
Of course there's a bad guy in your network. There's a bad guy in every network.
Right. Well, we know that now. We know that now. They didn't know that. They didn't want to spend money on it to find out.
Yeah, of course not. So what was the major breakthrough that kind of you decided, okay, this is a nugget. I can go with this. It was a technical breakthrough, really. I mean, how did you go from, I got a kernel of an idea over here, I think I can expand this and turn this into a larger business?
I think the experience we had during that exercise against the NSA, and I wasn't the brainchild of it. Like, I can't take credit for that. Sure. I was one of 4 people, and I wasn't even the smartest one. But
it's probably a good room to be in.
Yeah. I was definitely not the smartest one, but I happened to be into the Wounded Warriors, and they couldn't promote me and they couldn't send me anywhere. So I was the only one left after a couple of years, because we did such a good job. Uh-huh. And then suddenly I am the smartest person in the room. Like, wow, lucky. But that whole experience of being able to watch that whole thing play out and knowing that being proactive was working. And then also, oh, by the way, the government networks are really difficult to triage and get through and to get access to everything. That was a huge challenge. Hey, I know they're out there, but I can't even get access to these systems. I can't even jump into a new network that I know is compromised because the attacker came through your network, and you don't have the tooling that I use on my network to discover them. So how can I hunt in your network if you don't have my tools, my sensors, and my policies? That means I have to re-architect your network to go and hunt. And that was the impetus for Infocyte, my company. I talked to Russ Morris, who's my co-founder. He was a captain getting out at the time. He was an Air Force red teamer. I said, like, there's commercial application here. This one question of how do I hunt for bad guys? We spent years building up the infrastructure in the Air Force network to go and find the actors that we were trying to look for. But time and again, it was always like, they're not in our network. They're not in our well-instrumented network. They're in the not well-instrumented network that we'll never find them in, because that's where they can hide. They're in the shadows. So Infocyte was all about, how do I solve that problem of, you have a network that is not instrumented correctly, you're not logging. And it turns out every commercial organization we talked to was like this, except for a very select few. And so we can build this tool, and we can go out and assess your organization. We can hunt in this organization, and we can find problems. We can find hidden problems that you don't know about because you're not instrumented to find them. And that's what Infocyte was when we first created it.
So what were your sort of major crazy success stories? Like, kind of walk in and then you just found something crazy? Because I know there was a number of them.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of them. I think today most hacking, or a lot of hacking, has a real flashy kind of end. It's ransomware. I got hacked. All my entire organization's hacked, and now we all get a pop-up that says, I owe you Bitcoin. Well, you don't need to hunt for that. They just told you they're there. The type of thing that we were finding were precursors to that. A lot of times before that ransomware, someone's in that network for a long time, or they got in real early, didn't know what they had, and then they say, okay, this is valuable. I'm gonna ask them for 2 Bitcoins because they're a bigger organization, and now I know who they are. Or the type of actors that are spying on you, or the type of actors, threat actors that are using you to attack other organizations. So those are the types of hacks where you'll never know, because they don't want a pop-up.
Or just changing data slowly over time for some reason.
Yeah.
Those are terrible. They're very difficult to find.
Yeah, those ones in specific, especially political organizations, you don't want to see that.
Those are hard.
Those types of attacks aren't seen as much, and they're not in the stats. Those were the ones we were finding. Mm-hmm. So when we went and ran the software, we'd say, hey, you are breached. And they go, well, I haven't lost money in the last 3 years, and you're telling me it's been here for 3 years. They've had access to my network, and they're not doing anything. They're not impacting my business. Is this worthwhile to me? I'm like, well, let's see what they're doing. Okay, you're not logging a lot, so I can't tell you everything they're doing, but I can tell you they're using you to attack other organizations. I can tell you they have access to your emails. I can tell you that if they wanted to, they could take you down. Do you want that? And so that conversation ended up happening we had some, hospitals where they were breached and being used to attack other organizations. We had, or precursors to a ransomware attack where they were just propagating their access throughout the entire network so they could ransom them all at the same time. That could take weeks, and for some of these actors, maybe hours for a really good one that's got a well architected network. Mm-hmm. But there's always this time component with hacks. And there's always people hack more organizations that they can actually process. And so a lot of people end up being hacked for a long time before the impact occurs, mm-hmm. if there ever will be a big impact that you're going to see. And so whether it's a hospital or a bank, we've had biotech companies that were breached and they didn't know it, and it was years. Mm-hmm. Someone, whether it's a competitor in a different country, has access to your network and your research data. Do you want that? I can't tell you the exact impact of where it went, but I know they have access. So those are the types of things we were finding.
So this actually reminds me of a conversation I had just a couple days ago with somebody. He's like, there's a friend of a friend who can somehow get all these crazy tickets, like not just like sort of good tickets, like scalping type, and not for crazy huge prices like you might see with a scalper. These are like, $1,500 tickets they can get for like $30. And they're real tickets, and this person will actually go and they'll have this amazing time. It's like, I can't believe I had these crazy awesome tickets for like $30. But it's not just like one place, it's many different places. He's like, how is this happening? And not actually having access to these networks, it's impossible to know for sure. But one of the many ways it could be is just somebody says they have a bank of really awesome tickets they have for dignitaries or whatever, and then a certain cohort of people can pull out those tickets as needed for these emissaries or, mayors or whatever. And instead of them getting utilized, they just pull them out. They suck them out, or some variant of that, where from a conference organizer's perspective or a concert organizer's perspective, they're not losing any money. I mean, they'd already banked these to get rid of them. I mean, they're designed to give to ultra wealthy or ultra politically powerful people or whatever. So they were expecting to lose that money either way. It's just that they didn't go to where they thought they're not going to get the political clout associated with giving them away to the mayor or whatever, or the governor or whoever it is. So I think those types of actors, yeah, they didn't lose money, but they didn't get what they wanted. And a lot of those systems, I mean, you can just imagine. I go to the Circuit Americas sometimes, and I call them for asking for tickets, and they're like, "Well, this system's terrible. Like nothing's in sorted order, and it takes me forever to find anything." And a system like that, obviously, they're not going to notice somebody who's just grabbing one or two seats here and there, or very, very.
It's the old penny stealers from Office Space.
Yeah, exactly. And over time, one back end at a time, it's maybe not very useful, but when you get enough of them and it's just kind of constantly flowing through the network, and you get a stable of people who's really interested in buying your $30 tickets or whatever, it suddenly starts adding up and becoming a real thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, the risk is high because you're putting yourself out there, and it's easy to find once you know it's there, but what's the value to hunt that? It's just not very high. So,
and that was a big problem. We couldn't convince, back then, this was like 2013, 2014 timeframe when I was trying to pitch this, like, would this even have commercial application? Because do we even want to know, like, is it worth it? If the thing is not seen on the balance sheet as an impact, as a business impact. Fast forward to today, it's actually a pretty common practice now. People want to know early. We realize that these attacks do occur. We do realize that access like that is a bad thing. And if a regulator or an insurance company finds out we didn't do anything about it and we're not proactively looking, we're going to get hit, and they're not going to cover me when I do have a real impact. And so I think a lot of things have changed over the last decade, where this proactive nature, threat hunting, monitoring my network, having good visibility on what's going on in my network, whether it's even these tickets that are floating out the side because no one even realizes, no one even knows, low-grade theft and fraud. Yeah, it has a monetary consequence, but when you're hacked and someone has unfettered access, you just could do anything. They're not doing anything right now, or they're stealing pennies. They're stealing little tickets that nobody cares about. But that same access, especially when it's at the operating system level in a network, can be sold to anybody with a bigger agenda. Mm-hmm. And that's the real danger.
Yeah, so, totally. I completely agree. So you mentioned the time component. I think this is an interesting side comment. So what do you think about the future of the world where adversaries have fully weaponized and using the word AI is wildly too complicated for what I'm really describing, but something that can take a brand new exploit, convert it into code, and fire it off with effectively machine efficiency. So instead of it taking, hours or days, and you were saying like it might take days to pivot around inside of a network, it's more like milliseconds or, maybe a second or two to do the full composition analysis, double check to make sure it works, and fire it off at exactly the targets you're after, but definitely not days. What does that do for hunting? You think that's just sort of the death of that sort of slow, by comparison anyway, reaction? Or do you think that there will be a counter reaction, or how do you deal with that kind of threat?
I've had this discussion a lot because the conception with, you're not a layman in this world. So there are ways to hack fast, there's ways to hack slow, and most hacking is a pretty monotonous process.
Yes.
But most laymen, especially the buyers of cybersecurity products, have in their mind the movie theater. You can hack in seconds, and if you have a good enough hacker, they can break any door and break any lock on demand.
Right. Of course they can.
Of course. Because they're hackers.
Give enough time.
They have purple hair. Like, obviously they can break that, that lock.
Yeah.
The reality is a little bit less than that, or a lot less than that, in that, like in the military, it's like if the general wants a cybersecurity effect, and they say, hey, take down that power plant, and they haven't attack that organization, or have an implant, or have a way in already, or know about a vulnerability of a piece of software that they currently have, or even done the recon to know what software they have, so that when I'm asked to take it down, can I? If I have to go and do that recon, find out what software is running in that power plant, find out, is it vulnerable to anything, develop an exploit, attack the organization, okay, I'm in. Am I in the first ring, or am I in the deep where I can turn off the whole thing? Like, that's going to take some time.
Yeah, it does take time.
And no one likes that request of take down the power plant, turn off the lights, when we haven't prepped the battlefield. Mm-hmm. So preparation of the battlefield on the military side is a huge component of cybersecurity, and it's constantly happening. Mm-hmm. We want to be able to turn off the lights on demand. We have a lot of work to do before that. With the criminals, oftentimes they are hacking everybody. So they take over 1 million computers. Well, which one has money? They just took over 1 million computers. One of them's grandma. One of them is a flower shop. Over here, we got a bank. The bank I can actually exploit. I can extort. I can take money from, and they'll probably pay me off. Mm-hmm. But I can't ask for that same amount of money from the flower shop that doesn't even have it. Mm-hmm. So there is a large component to this of even understanding what you hacked. Even if you had that system, that AI system that said I can hack anything on demand when I press the button, even if that existed, now you have too many assets and you don't even know what value they have.
So what if I could precede the battlefield with knowledge of what is out there? Mm-hmm. And then when I'm ready, when the exploit exists, when it finally arrives at my doorstep and someone's finally developed it, and I'm like, okay, great. I can fire it off at that second that it comes out. So let's say a brand new exploit hits the world, someone in the world has got it and they publish it somewhere and I happen to see it. I should be able to be on the box within a second of that arriving to your inbox and my inbox at the same time, your blue team, my red team. And from your perspective, it looks an awful lot like I'm the adversary. Yep. I have precognition because there's no way I could possibly have done all of that crazy knowing that you exist, that you have this vulnerability and taking this vulnerability and turning it into code and actually running it on your computer and getting full access in that time frame. It just seems illogical that would be true. And yet I do think that while it may be not existing today, I think that if something like that were to be built, and I've built components of it, so I know it can be done, I think that changes how we react completely. Like a lot of the defensive stuff that we talk about in computer security just doesn't work anymore. Like even things like web application firewalls that are designed to stop web application threats, you can't update the backplane fast enough. Mm-hmm. It's a multi-second update of the backplane where I can be on your computer in under a second. Yep. So that's an order of magnitude too slow. And that's in the best case.
Yeah, the world is changing. I don't think proactive measures are going away anytime soon, especially for large networks that are persistent for a very long time. The world has changed, and the way we defend our networks is really lagging behind. And it pretty much, I think that's going to be ever present because corporations and governments and bureaucracies.
I totally agree. I'm just throwing it out there as what might the world look like in that scenario?
Yeah, I think,
what changes?
In that case, it might look like the movies. I could imagine this little board and it's like, I've got 10 targets or 10 organizations that I may want to attack sometime in the future. At any given moment, the software that they have or the things that they're exposed to, some of them are green, some of them are red. I can get into those right now if I wanted to. So I can't get into those right now if I wanted to. I would need to do some more research. And I have a team over here researching all the red ones that I can't get into. But I want that board green. But regardless, I got 10 targets. If I got the go order, I can give them at least 2 options. Like I could imagine that being a real thing.
Yeah. I think so too.
Yeah.
I think it's getting close.
Yeah.
Maybe not this year, but I think a lot of these software components, like a lot of the ability to decompile more complex vulnerabilities and turn them into code, we're really close. We're really, really close. One problem with vulnerabilities is hackers often put their own exploit code that will counteract or actually hack the hacker trying to use it. So you have to be really careful with this code.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling if a Robert Hansen can identify, I think a computer could do even a better job at doing it faster. Yeah. Much faster. So I know you have a number of competitors out there. Like, how did that end up going when you got into head-to-head deals? Like, how did that all sort of play out?
Well, this is a exercise in business.
Yeah, sure.
The world changes a lot. Being just a technical cyber guy going in and saying I'm going to go create a business. Never even worked in the commercial world in my life. In fact, when I asked for money, that was kind of the feedback I got. Was like, have you ever had a real job? I'm like, no, I worked for the government for 10 years. I'll get out. But we did have some backers that said, we've got great domain knowledge. Let's go out and create something. It's a hot space. Detection in general was a hot space. CrowdStrike and SentinelOne were brand new back then. Raising their first like Series A's and stuff like that and showing real promise that this was a real market. We were kind of on the side of the market and we were underfunded and didn't have a lot of business acumen. And so that's actually a bad thing when you're trying to go and defeat 28 different companies that all raise $100 million and they all have really good business pedigrees on their executive staff. Two captains from the Air Force aren't going to get a whole lot of money, and they're not going to get a whole lot of clout, and it's an uphill battle. I was naive, and I think that naivety is really the reason I did it, and I'm really glad for it. If I had known what I knew now, I would have been like, not even start.
Yeah, sure. No, and that's very common. A lot of people they're either, I don't mean this in a bad way too dumb to know that they shouldn't be doing this. But, often those people are very successful because they just beat their heads against a wall that everyone else says, that's a wall, stop doing that. And they're like, what? Eventually it'll break. And then they get through it. And then you're on the other side.
It's a combination of just stubbornness and luck.
Luck is a big part of it.
I think also we had, the type of creativity you have when you have a business that has no executives and no structure and no oversight really, and you can kind of tinker and do whatever and try different things. Like that's where real innovation is happening. That's why startups do so well. That's why I see big companies say, well, I created this little branch that's going to go do some R&D and create a startup within a big company. Never works.
Never works.
The oversight stifles innovation. It stifles creativity. And when they have a harebrained idea, you're like, oh, we can't do that. That's too much risk.
Yeah.
Versus a startup that just got, $500,000 from a bunch of rich people who can afford to lose it. Yeah, go try it. See if it works. Don't try the thing everything else is doing because those companies are better funded than you. So we would look at the companies that were getting a lot of money in this detection space. Like CrowdStrike was the big one. They were the big heavy gorilla that was doing really well. Carbon Black was a big one on the EDR space. And so we were kind of ancillary to that.
EDR being
endpoint detection and response, which is the category that we were kind of playing with.
Sure.
So detect the bad guys,
make sure the audience
respond
is
to the bad
us.
guys. And that whole technology took off out of the 28, we were like the 29th. And out of those, most of them raised too much money, went out of business, sold, combined with some others. And there were really only like 3 winners. We were not one of those. But we survived. We were small. We didn't raise too much money.
Well, being underfunded is sometimes a really huge advantage. It means that people can finally buy you. You don't have to take a down round. You can actually get purchased. Yeah.
It's kind of like the show Silicon Valley. There's an episode in it. Like there's too many episodes in Silicon Valley for startup people.
Yeah.
Like, that's too close to home.
It was. Yeah. When I first watched that first episode, I'm like, I don't know if I can watch any more of this.
Yeah. I had to stop because it was like, okay, their company is further ahead than me and I don't want to know the future. So, but there was an episode in it where the company that's like dying comes over and he goes, wait, you could raise less money? Like, cause they're like, they didn't make their numbers. They raised $28 million, but a business that's, raised too much money and still growing 200% can still be a bad company because you just took enough money to get to orbit and all you did was get to the stratosphere. Yeah. You still flew. That's still cool. Probably would be a really good plane, but you got enough money for a space shuttle, not a plane. So you're just going to crash into the ground.
Did you ever meet Mubix?
No.
He's a security guy. He actually wrote Guilfoyle. So actually one of us. So when you actually got in these competitive deals, did you win them? Did you lose them? Or why did you win?
Yeah, we ended up, one of our strategies, and I still don't know if this is the right strategy, but it worked for us. And it was, let's not play in the big playground with the big players that were way, way better funded than us and had better marketing teams. Let's do something they're not doing. So even though we're kind of in the umbrella of that space, let's do something a little bit that they're not doing. Let's build a niche. And so chasing a niche is a good thing if you're not the number one. It's also a bad thing because your market's smaller. People don't take you as seriously. So incident response, this threat hunting concept, really pushing on that. We ended up getting picked up by some big firms that do that type of work. They were using our product to do it. We got exposure to some really big companies, even though no one heard of our company, Infocyte. We were still operating in big insurance companies, massive trillion-dollar banks. Our software was running in because we focused on a niche use case that the other players weren't doing. Did it help us on, winning the market or being a player in that space? Not as much, but it got us, it got us revenue. It got us in. We were doing something that other people couldn't do. Part of that was like that problem of I'm going into a network that doesn't have the right infrastructure. I need to be able to interact with a organization that doesn't have the right infrastructure. None of our competitors were thinking about that. That was the primary problem I started Infocyte on. I said, we got to be able to get in there. The bad guys are in there. And so that whole concept of being able to get into these networks that are not well instrumented was our niche. And we ended up being used by incident responders that parachute into a new network they'd never seen before. And they're not going to have help from the admin. So the incident responders were using us, and proactive assessment teams and threat hunters were using us. And so that ended up being successful, not hugely successful, wasn't going to build $1 billion company, but it kept us going. And so that it wasn't, I'd say at the end of that, we had built a decent business, but not necessarily a venture class great success.
Not the home run.
Right.
One quick point. So you also worked on down market. You worked on these smaller like SMBs, right?
Towards the end.
Yeah.
And that's really where our success came from. And what I'm doing right now, which is for cybersecurity for small business. We build, products for the small business to do it. Because the other thing is when you're getting beat by your competitors, even though we had strong technical talent, we had really good creative ideas, and we were punching way above our weight for the number of people we had. Mm-hmm. We constantly got accolades from our customers and our clients that you act like a bigger company. You have the technical expertise that these bigger companies don't have, and you're able to help us on problems that they can't help us on. And so we had all the elements, just not the money and the power and the name to be able to really leverage it. So that first decision of let's do something niche that they're not doing, okay, that worked a little bit. We still were operating in an enterprise space that required a lot of trust. Mm-hmm. When we couldn't really we hit a glass ceiling kind of on our revenue and our growth, we decided we got to try something different. Let's not just make it a more niche-y product. Let's actually take maybe some elements of what they were doing where we didn't want to compete, the EDR space, the endpoint detection and response space. Let's add those components that we decided not to really focus on, and let's deliver it to a market that wasn't being well prepared, and that was the small business market. Yeah. Small business was not doing monitoring, was not doing threat hunting, was not doing anything that the enterprise space was now consolidating on.
Well, it's not that they're not, often even if they want to, they can't. I remember working with a small company, and I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll reach out to one of your biggest competitors, one of the top 2 or 3, and they just wouldn't even give me the time of day, even though it was me. I'm like, you know who I am, right? They're like, yeah, but we can't. I'm like, no. I mean, you know who I am? Like, I'm just like making sure here. Like, yeah. Like, yeah, we can't. You're too small. Like, you have to have at least 1,500 endpoints. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. You're like literally going to hang up the phone on me right now? I'm like, yeah, sorry. Yeah. And they did. They literally hung up on me in the middle of talking. I'm like, I could not believe that was actually happening. And this was a company that could easily grow wildly way past that. It just was at early stage at the moment. So, I think serving that SMB market, I mean, I certainly would never call them again. You know what I mean? It was just because the problem is if I have 3 different companies all trying, you acquire a company and they're using something different, I'd rather just have one. Yeah. I don't care if they're small or huge or whatever, just one. And so, that was a very strange conversation, and it always stuck with me.
I think small business it works more on trends, and it acts more like a commercial market or a consumer market, where they don't have really great decision makers and consultants going around telling everybody what to do and how to do it and what the options are. And so you kind of have to treat it as like these folks are going to move on trends and not on great decisions. So the evangelical sale of saying, this is what you need, here's why you need it. You went to my TED Talk, and you heard me and said, yeah, that's what I need. That's how the enterprise buys stuff. They go, hey, that solves a problem I have. Mm-hmm. Small business, it's got to solve thousands of organizations' problems. Mm-hmm. The organization I'm part of now, Datto, has 29,000 partners, and those partners all do IT management and security management for hundreds of customers under them. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about hundreds of thousands of entities that we're serving. We can't go and talk to all of them. They got to watch videos and read content. Mm-hmm. And it has to be a concept that is fairly, starting to, that's already been adopted by the enterprise. So when we went down market, we said, the enterprise is already doing this. And, why aren't you? And then we started seeing insurance requirements saying, hey, you need to monitor your network. You need EDR. And so we got in the right time at the right, with the right product for the small business. And because we were such a small team, we were able to pivot fast and do that. And we were able, because we had direct contact with them, we were able to say, hey, our product's actually too complicated for them. We need to make it easier. It's got a space shuttle. Interface. We need to make it an iPod interface, simplify it. And then we can sell this product to them. And when the big enterprise players, the CrowdStrikes of the world, they won't be able to pivot down because they've been serving this really large enterprise market and they're distracted. Mm-hmm. So that was about 2018 timeframe when we decided to do that.
I think that was a great idea because I cannot imagine a world where I would ever recommend any of those. Even if a company was right on the cusp of getting to be big enough and I knew that they could kind of skirt in over the line, I'm like, why bother?
Yeah.
It's just, you're going to get the worst possible customer service because you're the smallest customer instead of just working with you, and a lot of times smaller companies, they might be very tiny, but very important in their own right. And are we saying that they don't deserve good security? And a lot of those small companies, they serve enormous companies. I remember I did this analysis for this one company, and this is another one, almost a very similar situation where they were worried about people modifying their data, not stealing data, not deleting data, modifying data. And they were a company that did healthcare stuff, and they were basically trying to do autism research. And the problem is their adversaries are very fanatical on both sides. Some people believe autism is a genetic thing, and some people think it's an environmental thing. And the people who believe it's genetic think
political.
Yeah, extremely. So they think that if it's genetic, you should be able to test for it, and that means you should be able to abort the people and get rid of them. But there's a whole bunch of people who say, wait, you're going to abort me? Like, I have autism and I'm still a productive person. Like, why would you do that? Like, I don't want that to happen, right? So they're very, angry about that. Mm-hmm. And then the other side is, okay, it's probably some drug. And so if that's the case, China has this insanely large amount of autism. If it's drug related and US manufacturers created said drug, which is incredibly likely, that could initiate a war. And so there's two conflicting and very politically interested group to make sure that it goes whatever direction that they want it to go. And these are extremely good patient hackers who really want the data to go one direction or another. And so they're like, we don't know which way the data is going to go, but we certainly don't want to be impacted by whomever's out there.
We don't want it manipulated.
Right, exactly. So this is a company that might have some of the biggest implications of where let's say it's a drug one, the biggest implications of drug manufacturing, or let's say it's biological, something you could test for. That would be an enormous boon to do that type of testing or whatever, and also detrimental for.
What is it, like a 40-person company that has one IT person?
I don't even think they've got one IT person. I mean, but yeah, it's like maybe 40 people. Yeah, it's tiny, tiny little company. So to say that company doesn't deserve to find out that they've been compromised is ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, small businesses, you're talking about hedge funds, you're talking about biotech researchers. Like, these are small businesses. They don't have IT staffing. They don't have on-staff security.
Right.
So often they go to these service providers that do that. And those service providers are supposed to provide that, and they say, well, number one thing I need computers, I need phone, I need internet, and just make sure it's secure. And the security portion is always that afterthought. Like, I need all this stuff and make sure it's secure. Mm-hmm. So small businesses are always going to do just enough because they can't go and convince them they need anything more than it's secure.
So you eventually got acquired.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me about how that went.
Yeah, my first acquisition of my first company. Russ and I, the co-founder, we had always thought about what would this look like, and when you're in that cycle of you just started, you're going to change the world, the reality sets in. What did we do? Russ's wife is like, why'd you make him quit his job? Like, we had such a good life. Damn you, Chris. We're friends now again. So,
Sure.
But that whole process ends on an acquisition, and for us, the move to go down market into small businesses was like the number one thing we did. And we got on the radar of Datto. Datto is an organization that serves the small business market through partners. And so they provide technology stack, they provide backup, they provide all these other components of delivering a managed IT service. And, oh, by the way, when you're delivering that, it needs to be secure. That started being a bigger and bigger conversation. Before it was just antivirus. And then, 2018, 2019, 2020, especially as we go into the pandemic, it started being a really relevant concept where insurance says, thou must monitor your network. You have to do more than just the antivirus you've been doing. The enterprise is already well adopted with all of this stuff. And in fact, like CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, those and others went IPO. Huge companies now, really successful. And so Datto said, we got to get into that too. And all of their competitors in the small business space were starting to white label the enterprise technology and trying to adapt it and go shove it into these small businesses. It's not going to work as well. They don't have anybody to run it. And so that was the strategy. Datto came along and said, we should buy or build because we need to make it work for our customers. Mm-hmm. And so that was the whole strategy. And they went out and scoured everybody looking who's operating the space, who's simple enough for the small business. Oh, there's this, company in Texas that's been doing this. They have really good people. We evaluated them. They're like, I wouldn't say they're better than any of the big enterprise players, but like their expertise is there, the capabilities there, and they're operating in our space. So we were on their short list. And so we ended up winning out on that short list. They purchased the company. It was a huge outcome for Russ and I, even though, I think we kind of contribute that to the fact that we raised about $13 million in total venture capital. Mm-hmm. Struggled a lot, especially against competitors that had hundreds or 500 million in funding.
Then went public.
Spending.
So suddenly have $1 billion to spend on marketing.
Right. Yeah. When you're trying to compete with a company that spends 100 million on R&D and 600 million in marketing, and I've got, a couple million, you mean Russ, like that's really tough. So when at the exit, we had about 30 people working with the company, got acquired, and the whole objective was to kind of adapt it and deploy it into the security stack or into the entire IT stack that our partners buy at Datto. Mm-hmm. And so it was a really cool proposition, really cool to be part of and to watch actually happen. And so it's been a year now, and it's been very, very successful.
So what was it like working with VCs? Do you regret that decision? Was that the right decision? Would you do it differently next time? Any sort of lessons for the entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think when you work with VCs and you're doing really well, they're the best people in the world. When you're not doing real well, they're terrible to work with. Like they hate you, you hate them. You're a zombie company, So, and they know it. They know that 9 out of 10 of their companies are going to go nowhere or just break even. And breaking even is a good outcome if you're not, the winner. Mm-hmm. So it's always funny to me that that's the concept, and yet, I've had conversations in the boardroom where they're like, "Oh, Chris, I've never seen anything this horrible before. Like, this is a terrible outcome. This is not going well." And I'm like, 9 out of 10 of your companies do worse than us. But they drive every company to be the grand slam.
Sure.
When you take VC money, you're going to orbit. That's probably the one thing I would say to answer your question is like, would I do it again? Is VC the right route? If you're trying to get to orbit, VC is the route. They'll give you a lot of money to do it. And especially like now I've had an exit, I could go ask for a lot of money and go put another thing in orbit if I wanted to. But 90% of success when you're trying to get to orbit means you're crashing in the ocean. Mm-hmm. And people don't realize that when you go to VC route, you get to orbit or you die. Like there is no average business. There's no lifestyle business. There's no 50% growth every year for 10 years. And there's been some awesome companies built and sold for a lot of money that took 15 years to get there. VC's not waiting around for that. Mm-hmm. You get to orbit or you go away. And we're going to make sure you're spending money to the point where that's 18 months from now.
Right. Yeah, that is one thing I really dislike about VCs right there. They really want to see your burn nice and high because they want to make sure that they get another chunk of revenue, another chunk that they can invest in.
Yeah.
And if that burn isn't sufficient, then they can't put more chips on the table. They want more and more and more chips on the table.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. So would you do it again though? I mean, I know you're in the middle of it. You're still in the company, but 5 years, 10 years from now, you're done
Probably
with
sooner, yeah.
you're done hanging out on your yacht, and you're
I don't have a yacht. I have a Tesla.
and suddenly you get an idea. Are you going with it, or are you just like, no, I'm not doing that again?
Yeah, I think it's a huge question. I think now that I have resources, it changes the question. Like back then I had nothing. I had ideas, I had knowledge, and I had $0 to my name. So finding anybody that would give us money was like what we needed. And so some of that was just necessity. Like who would do this? And we're in the right market space. Cybersecurity is really hot, and VCs are after it. So let's go that route. And then, but because you fit into the VC route, you got to do something that's going to be unicorn. That's not going to make $1 billion. So don't do it. Go do that. It really forces you down to a certain path.
This is also like sort of like getting your MBA in real time.
Yeah.
You're learning a lot as this is all happening.
Yeah.
For good or bad.
Well, it was awesome. I mean, I had to do my own accounting for a while. I'm not an accountant. And we were on cash, first, and then we moved to accrual when we raised another round, and I lost complete perspective on what our cash position was, or even like how much money we had. It was all confusing to me. And so I had to relearn how to do accounting, having no background in finance.
And take out the trash. I mean, you have to do everything when you're a small company. It's kind of fun, actually.
Yeah.
So terms of the exit, were you happy with the terms? Any terms you would have done differently, or any terms you would have the person listening who might be starting a company, you like stay away from these types of terms or try to go for these? Anything
Yeah, I think
there?
the acquisition, like this process of negotiating with VC or negotiating during an acquisition these are opportunities that very few people have ever done before. And there's no real good books out there. In fact, like a lot of the books on M&A are from the 80s, and none of that works anymore, especially with a company that you're talking about valuations that are much higher because it's software. And
it's a promise of the valuation almost.
Yeah. So I was always told, don't talk to the bankers. The bankers will come over, they'll take 8% of your acquisition, and they'll just screw it up anyway. They negotiate, and they'll shop the deal and stuff. It'll just kill the deal. So don't talk to the bankers unless you're really, really big. And stuff. So we didn't retain a banker, but we did talk to one that was local in Austin. And so we went to Momentum Cyber and Eric McAlpine. He was an awesome, phenomenal resource for us. We didn't retain him officially. We just hey, will you have a dinner with us? We'll pay you as a consultant or something like that. We ended up using Momentum Cyber, but from that dinner, that one dinner gave us a piece of advice that was really important on how to even negotiate what a valuation of this company is, because there is no paper valuation that was going to be worthwhile to anybody. Like if you just do standard revenue, you don't arrive at even what we raised. But if you look at software multiples, if you look at the opportunity to them, we had a couple hundred customers under our belt that were paying. They were going to go take our product, which currently has been demonstrated on some really large networks, so it's got scale. And they're going to go push it out with their 900 salespeople, and they're going to push it out to 29,000 partners, all in the same day that we go and launch. How much money could they make off that, off a product that's been demonstrated to work at scale?
Yeah, not like 10x your revenue,
right.
Enormous.
So we don't even think about our current revenue. In fact, if I lost every customer I have through this acquisition, when they're like, hey, you got bought, you're gone, they didn't even consider it, because the opportunity to them was this bigger number out front and saying, over the next 3 years, we're going to make X dollars. So whatever we pay for you, it's paltry compared to what we're going to make off you. So the valuation is really some fraction of the total value that they're going to deliver from this. And in acquisition terms, whenever the company pays less money than the value they got for the asset after the acquisition's done, it's called accretive. And it's like, when does the acquisition become accretive for that organization? And we were like, if they pay $50 million for the company, which wouldn't have been a number I would have thrown out any time in the world. If they paid $50 million for us, it would take them 6 months to recoup the whole thing based off of their growth metrics. So go ask for 75.
Awesome.
So that whole process was brand new to us, and we did have a lot of success because we did talk to people who had done it before. And Eric was one of those guys.
Yeah, great. So, you obviously don't have to tell me any of this, but reps and warranties, insurance, RSUs, all that stuff, is that pretty standard for you, or?
Yeah. When you're a founder, you get retained usually in high technology companies. So, me, the co-founder, the head of engineering, a couple of the key players, we all got agreements that said, we need you to stay on for 3 years. We don't want you to go and buy a yacht and then go live in Spain. Because a lot of founders do that when they have a good exit.
Or other places.
Yeah. Cancun, wherever you're going. So for us, it's like they have to keep the carrot, in front of us a little bit. They didn't want to do the acquisition if we were just going to go fly off and, into the sunset with our Teslas and our yachts, if that was like what we were going to do. So oftentimes when you do an acquisition in a smaller business to a strategic buyer who needs the technology, needs the people, they put you on a earn out. They put you on a contract that says like, you don't even get most of the acquisition unless you stay with us for 3 years and it's successful. If it dies next year because you lied or something like that, we're recouping. If it dies because you didn't help us integrate it with our technology stack, you're not getting half the acquisition.
Wow.
And so a lot of those agreements will have cases like that.
Did you have something like that?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So we did not, but mostly because we fought off. We got like, I'm not doing that because I can't guarantee that the acquirer can get their stuff in order and necessary to make this all happen. So I don't want to be beholden to their bad engineering, disciplines or competing priorities or whatever else. So we said absolutely not. In fact, we almost killed the deal over it. Just said, nope, not sorry, or we're walking away. Just not a deal term we want to deal with.
Yeah.
They're like, whoa. Let's not kill the deal over it. Like, so that's interesting.
And it's a big question of during the negotiation. Are you negotiating with the business people or are you negotiating with the lawyers? Once the lawyers take over, everything's like off the rails. Like most unpleasant part of negotiation is watching lawyers bill us while they talk about things that don't matter.
Yeah, and then they become friends.
Yeah.
Spend 10 minutes talking about the weather. Okay, well, does it feel real? I mean, I don't know. I don't really feel like for me it's done. Yeah. I just feel like it's in the back of my head, like it's still.
Yours was this summer?
Yes. Yeah, right. Early summer.
Okay. Mine was January.
Okay.
So it's been a year now.
So you're slightly ahead of me.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first 6 months was like a whole lot of loss of control. Like, oh my gosh, this isn't mine anymore. And I'm being constantly reminded that this isn't mine anymore. I went through a weird one, and this is like unique to our situation, but we got bought by a publicly traded company, and we had this whole plan, and it was like an awesome organization. We integrated into it and liked the people that we were working with and the leaders that we had, met the CEO, and 5 months later, these guys go dark on us. And it's like, okay, we're just operating on our own, a lot of independence. I love it. And then we get this, the announcement. Oh, by the way, the company that just acquired you just got acquired themselves by a big competitor of theirs. And so we were initially like on day one of that announcement, we were like, well, what about our plan? Like, we're going to go relaunch this product under this brand. Well, is that still in effect? Is our agreement still good? Because some of it was a little bit of on a handshake. How do I define the performance metric? Really up to the company. The new acquirer is going to put some lawyers on this and realize it's pretty light. What does this mean for us? And so that was a lot of craziness this summer as this company that was publicly traded got taken private and merged, going from a 2,000 employee company to a 4,000 employee company. And oh, by the way, this little 30-person company that you just acquired and how the grand plans for, we don't even know what they do. And so on the day one, they were like, well, we don't need them. And that costs a lot. So like day one idea was like, yeah, we'll probably just get rid of them. And then they read the contract and go, oh, okay, we would have to accelerate them and stuff like that. Let's have a phone call with them at least. Oh, you do that? We need that. Then we became the all-stars again. It was like this roller coaster.
So that is quite a story because now you've kind of gone through two acquisitions.
All in the same year.
Yeah, just a couple heartbeats.
We're like a baseball card. Like we've been traded to this company, and then we were traded over here and stuff. So we actually spent a bunch of time integrating with the Datto, and then the new acquirer, Kaseya, came along, and we spent another few months integrated with them. So we didn't even launch our product again under their banner until we had done 9 months of integration work with both entities and figuring out what we were even going to do strategy-wise. And so here we are, like November 15th, we relaunched our product. It's now called Datto EDR, and it's,
Today it is.
Yeah, that's what it is now.
Are they going to keep that brand around, Datto, you think?
I think so.
Okay.
They don't tell me that, but we'll see. Maybe when this airs, it'll be a different name. But going back to like the performance metric, it's like, hey, well, this has to be a success for you to get the full outcome. Like it's still a good outcome regardless, but the full outcome, the full boat on it would require us to have a sales number, and the double acquisition required us to push our go-to-market till November 15th. So here we are. We need 45 days to go put this out to the market to hit a number that we thought we would have most of the year on. And the new acquirer was like, well, we didn't make that agreement. Like, we're not changing it. They kind of worked with us a little bit, but it's been a pulling teeth to do it.
Yeah, sure.
Luckily, it's been a super success with both of these companies, both these entities, and selling it and being like, actually, security is like the number one thing we need for small business right now. And this is going to sell like hotcakes because people need it. And the insurance companies are saying, thou must have it. And they don't have $20 per device per month to pay CrowdStrike. Yours is a lot cheaper because it's built for the small market. And there's certain things easier to use, fewer features. Actually, they actually had us disable a few features because they're like, it's too complicated. And we want to sell it for less. We don't want to maintain it. So it's got to be underpriced under the enterprise. We're taking enterprise capability, making it easier, making it cheaper. Now the small business can take it. And that strategy worked really well because we have sold like hotcakes. And we made our number in like 6 weeks.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
4 weeks. It took 4 weeks to meet the number we had set out. That would have taken us 6 months.
Wow.
So
congratulations. That's awesome. So another thing I wanted to talk to you about outside of all this security stuff, you're involved in an organization called Thinkers and Drinkers.
Yeah, a little side project.
Yeah, so tell me all about that.
Yeah, so this was, 8 years ago, 2013 timeframe, about the time I was getting out of the military. A roommate of mine, Ian Perry, we had been friends forever. We were deployed to Kuwait together. We were reaching the age of 30 at the time, and we were realizing like we're too old.
Still had hair, but too old for the clubs, too old for the social life that we were trying to, we were not married. We just realized like we're too old for this, but we're not married and we're not old enough for like the tea and crumpets and wine and all the other stuff that adults do. So something in the middle, let's just create it. And so we created it. We said, we want to go to a bar still, but we want to be able to hear the people that we're with, and we want to be able to talk about some deeper conversations than just the simple junk that people talk about. We're not going to a sports bar. They exist. And so we created Thinkers and Drinkers as kind of a Thursday thing, and it was 4 people. We'd have a topic, and that topic would rotate between a political conversation that was a current event or a philosophical, like, what do you think about death? Like some crazy, crazy things that make you think. And after a few drinks, you start talking about some deep stuff, and you bring up some deep things with strangers because we've had a few drinks lubricating, the conversation. And that ended up being something that a lot of people liked, and they kept coming week after week after week and kept getting bigger and bigger. Then we put it on the internet. 20, 30 people would show up, and we'd have these really large format conversations on deep topics, and we'd rotate between fun topics and deep topics so that we would build rapport. And we had a couple rules, like we were not a debate group. We're not here to debate left versus right or who's right or wrong. We're trying to figure out what you believe and why you believe it. And if you leave here understanding why they believe what they believe, and even if you disagree, then we've won. And those small ground rules and that simple concept has grown to about 8 cities. We have about 16,000 members on Meetup, the Meetup app, and we take international What are the cities,
trips.
just so that people listening can go, that's my city.
So we started in San Antonio. I took it to Austin, so we run it in Austin. It's weekly. So we started in Austin. After the pandemic, I restarted it. So we've got about 3,200 people on the meetup here in Austin.
3,200?
Yeah.
Wow.
Now they don't all show up.
Of course.
They're on the app.
That's going to take a little more than one bar.
We don't have a bar for that.
You need a stadium for that one.
Yeah. But we have Denver. We have Portland. We even have 2. It's called International, Thinkers Drinkers International, because one of our members went to Stuttgart, Germany. He was in the military. Started it there. And they liked it. So people there moved it to Berlin. So we have Berlin. We have Stuttgart. They've taken a huge hit after the pandemic, but our American cities are still going strong.
So if somebody listening was like, that sounds great, I want to do it in my city, can they reach out to you and say, hey, can I start the Milwaukee chapter or whatever?
We are discussing that. We have had a few cases where we've done that. In general, it's been organic. So someone from one of the cities where we've been active has gone to that new city, but they've been to a bunch of the meetups, so they know the format. And they don't just carry it off in random thing. That's been a very successful model. We've had 2 where complete random strangers saw it and said, that's a great concept. I want to do that. Can I be involved? When we did it, it ended up being so different, wildly different, that we couldn't even connect with them. We do these international trips where we bring the leaders from all the groups together and we go to a different country and hang out for a week. A lot of fun. And the cool thing about that is, regardless of what organization or what city you're from, we all connect with each other and we're all able to have deep conversations. And it's been really cool to see that happen. We want to maintain that. So right now we're still trying to figure out what our expansion strategy is, because the concept of random stranger listening to this podcast hears, oh, you guys meet up and have this conversation. That concept is not rocket science. You can do that. Being involved with Thinkers and Drinkers requires us to have some rapport and have we want to make sure that if I go to your city, I'm going to experience the same thing and it's kind of run the same way. So we're still trying to figure that out.
Gotcha. So I went to your Instagram page and I kind of trolled around looking at different, specifically the Austin group, intentionally, because what I was trying to do is pull out some of the topics that I saw that you had talked about. And so not the others, Denver, for instance, they're very active. I did not go to Denver's page and, pull their stuff out or their subsection or whatever. So I grabbed a couple just because I hadn't thought about any of them. So I'm coming in completely blind. I intentionally did not do research. You just have to trust me on this.
Sure.
And I thought this might be fun. Me coming in completely blind and you having all of the advantage of sitting through one of these things. But one thing I'll say before we get into that is, until you said the lubrication part of that, I kind of just glossed over that as part of the name and not really relevant to the format. But I think you're right, because one of my largest beefs with kind of group conversations, I got 2. One is, it seems like 1 or 2 people do all the talking and then the rest just kind of sit and listen or whatever. And so you're not really learning what the group thinks. You're learning what the same 2 or 3 people or who always talk at these things. And you can go into any kind of big meeting. It doesn't really matter, business meetings or, friend groups or whatever. And there's always just the 1 or 2 who are just talkers. They're going to dominate.
We call that loud guy.
Or girl.
Or
there's let's have equal opportunity.
We've had them. Part of our facilitation and part of the training on doing this is to get more people talking and shutting down loud guy or girl.
Okay.
Because they're talking too much.
I think for me in particular, I also feel a little uncomfortable talking about my opinion amongst a group of people who I do not know. See, I'm perfectly willing to give you my opinion because you and I know each other, and I know we're coming with enough similarity in our way of thinking, even if you and I totally don't agree on the topic, that we can still have a productive conversation without it devolving, right? Where if I'm sitting next to a complete random and I have no context for whether they can take a joke or not, or whether they are going to get highly offended by some random comment that I'm about a topic I'm not even making, or a comment I'm not really even saying, just, they take it the wrong way. That makes it very difficult to have an open dialogue for me personally. I just kind of like, I'll just sit on the sidelines and just listen. I'll listen all day long and really enjoy hearing it, but I'm probably not going to participate.
Yeah, we have people like that show up and just listen at first. One of the things that you said was that me and you could have the conversation because we have a rapport. We have
rapport.
We have some rapport.
Yeah.
Some rapport.
But not about this topic specifically.
Right.
I mean, that could be, we could have none about this.
But I mean, we could have a disagreement and it's not going to devolve into like a fist fight because we have other things we connect on.
Yet.
I'm sure there's one of
the night is young.
So in ours, one of the things that we do is rotate the topics specifically to build rapport. And we're a community, so we have repeat people and we'll do things that are fun. So I'll have a topic on modern dating. And we always choose topics that everyone can have an opinion on.
That is not one of mine.
That's not one of yours.
Okay.
So the key aspect is like, we're not an intellectual group. We're not like a snooty, you have to be smart to come talk to us, because the topics we choose is something everyone has an opinion on. If I choose a topic on modern dating, we've all probably experienced a little bit of it and probably have some opinions on it. Even if you're married, you've seen your friends go and get on apps and be like, that's the dumbest way to meet people ever. Mm-hmm. Or, hey, that's kind of cool. I wish I had that. Everyone has an opinion on it and can offer something. And it's kind of a fun topic where if you have like a weird opinion on it, no one's going to fight you over it. So we build this rapport and this ability to talk to each other so that the next meetup, when we say, let's talk about war or let's talk about, free speech, these really thick topics that could potentially have these really divisive lines, especially in a current political context. Those ones are less likely to result in a fight if we've had a little rapport and be like, we can compartmentalize the fact that I'm disagreeing with you on this topic, but we had a great time when we were talking about modern dating.
Yeah, but even with all that, I still think the part that I was missing was the alcohol.
Yeah.
Which, some people don't drink at all, so they're going to be a little put off by that part of it. But I really think that does do something for people. It lowers their inhibition just a tiny bit, maybe not even very much, but just enough where they're like, actually, you know what? That guy's really hilarious. I'm going to laugh at that joke. And like, yeah, man, I totally agree with you about that. Mm-hmm. And now I've just said something out loud. My opinion has been heard. Mm-hmm. I didn't even mean to do it. It's kind of like under my breath, sort of like, haha, yeah, right, man. And then it's like, oh, well, he agrees with this opinion. And suddenly I'm engaged.
Yeah. The alcohol component, it wasn't originally planned. Like we didn't have a master plan on how this would all work. It happened to organically grow and just the right elements were happening. And through trial and error, we arrived at a format and a facilitation skills thing to get people talking, and the right amount of alcohol and the right amount of time. Certain portions of the conversation are a 2-drink minimum. Some of them are a 2-drink maximum, and so,
you actually, it's like, okay, it's time for shots.
Yeah. we don't facilitate it like that, but for instance, let me give you a concept on how one of these things flows.
Yeah, please do.
So I kept on, this is Austin. So of course we've got some strong political opinions in
both directions.
Denver too.
Mm-hmm.
And Austin's an interesting one because we're 10 miles away from the big red, state. Mm-hmm. And within the 10-mile radius, we're a big blue dot. Mm-hmm. And so when I form a meetup that has a political topic in Texas, I tend to get both sides, which is nice. I like that.
Yeah, me too.
And so, I kept getting these requests. Hey, let's do one on socialism. Hey, let's do one on communism. Hey, let's do one on this like really divisive, topic. And I'm like, listen, like I've kind of been avoiding those right now because I need the group to have a little bit of rapport before we get into the fist fight conversations. And number two, if I post online that I'm having a topic on socialism or communism, I'm going to get a bunch of Bolsheviks and I'm going to get a bunch of cowboy hats coming here to fight. And that's the whole purpose they're going to be there for, because they see it.
Yeah. Which could be fun.
It can be fun. It's not the conversation I like to facilitate, though.
Of course.
I would run away.
Yeah.
So I came at it sideways and I said, let's try to get away from the left versus right, red versus blue, whatever we're doing in our country today. And that's one of the reasons why we do this group. And I continue to do it 8 years later, is because I think it's a necessary thing to bridge people that don't share opinions. Mm-hmm. And so I took that concept of the socialism and I said, we'll do it, but I'm going to come at it sideways and we'll still talk about it, but it won't be the same framing. And so I said, let's do social safety nets. And so the topic was social safety nets. And I opened it by saying, giving a quote by Margaret Mead, who's a she's a famous not sociologist. They study the history of civilization.
Okay.
I forget the name of it. I'm blanking on it. Anyway, she was at a conference and she was asked, what is the first archaeological record of civilization, in your opinion? Like, what would it be? And of course, most people kind of, when they think of that, they think, well, we found a hammer 28,000 years ago. We found a sickle. We found someone had cultivated the ground, and now there was farming. So therefore, we have this archaeological record that civilization at least existed back then, and from that point forward. And she said, no, it's actually about 100, I think it was tens of thousands of years before the hammer and farming and any of that stuff had occurred. It was like 80,000.
Arrowhead through the brain kind of thing.
It was a mended femur.
Oh.
And it was like they found a human remains where the femur had actually mended. And we know that takes 10 plus weeks in a good environment. And we know they're completely useless to a hunter-gatherer society while it's not healed. Mm-hmm. So for 10 weeks, and there's no case in the animal kingdom where an animal would be cared for 10 weeks while it's useless. It's just going to die. They're just going to leave it. Mm-hmm. You know, so this is the first case where they found an animal had, a group of animals had come together and put resources into an individual that had no way of contributing back to society, back to their group. For 10 weeks, they were useless. In fact, they made the group worse. They made the group...
Yeah, but you don't know how good a knitter they were.
They should be a good knitter. Touche. But yeah, they couldn't contribute back. Mm-hmm. Like, why are we spending all of our resources and not moving when we should be moving? We're hunters, we're gatherers, and we have to move, and we have to stay here for 10 weeks. We don't even know if he's going to live. He's going to get gangrene and die. Mm-hmm. Yet they're going to do it anyway for this individual that cannot contribute. We have no promise that they can contribute. We don't have any promise that they're going to actually survive this. And yet somehow this group did it. And she said that's the first archaeological record that we have civilization. And she defined it as a group of individuals did something for not just themselves or a selfish reason. So what do we owe each other in our society? What do we owe the people in our city who can't contribute back to us? Say the homeless. Hey, they're not doing anything for me. What do you owe them? Do you owe them anything? Like, that prompted a conversation that was phenomenal. Mm-hmm. And we talked about the concept of should the government do? What should we do? What should philanthropy do? Is that good enough? Will that work? And it ended up being on socialism, even though nobody brought up the word really.
Sure.
It was cool. It was really cool.
That's great. All right. So topics I saw. Number 1, maintaining relationships. So it's sort of similar to online dating, which is that you're going to do online dating once you don't have a relationship anymore.
Yeah.
So how might that conversation start? How might you kind of open that one, or how did you open that one?
Yeah, maintaining relationships. So, I mean, some of these topics are really broad.
Sure.
So that one, we could take that out of lens from dating and maintaining a long marriage.
Or friendships.
Or friendships.
Relationships at work.
And so we could talk about, you meet somebody and then you never talk to them again. Or you have high school friends that you've known forever. Mm-hmm. And that was actually kind of one of the reasons we brought it up, was why is it that the people that I was in the military with in my early years struggling with, I'm still great friends with today. The people I went to school with when I was really young and spent a lot of time with, I'm still friends with today. And today I can count on my hand the number of really strong friends that I've met later in my life. And a lot of them, there's a high possibility they may trail off and I might not speak to them for a while. They're just an acquaintance.
Okay, so you and I become friends later in life.
Yeah.
5-6 years back, something like that, 7 years, something like that. Why do you think we remain friends?
That is a good question. I think I have actually asked that question too, because part of it's like, how could I facilitate the old strong friendships that I built? Mm-hmm. You know, because I can contact those guys after a year of never speaking to them, and it's like we never left.
Yeah.
How could I?
And I would feel the same way about you.
Yeah. And so if I just take like our friendship, like going back and looking at how did we build that friendship and what element would we take away? Well, I had a really annoying friend who was like, everybody hang out all the time. You know, RJ.
I know RJ well.
Yeah. So RJ's like, let's hang out. And I'm like, no, I want to stay home and I just want to watch TV. No, you should come out. And he would say the same to you. And then all of a sudden we'd be at the bar together. Mm-hmm. And so I think because I facilitated the conversation on maintaining
and we weren't hanging out with the annoying guy. You were hanging at each other.
And he's great. He's a great guy. Love him. But he's always like, come out. And he was getting us people together. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that was really resonates with me on how did those early friendships form and become so strong, and what are the elements missing from forming relationships today? And it's the amount of opportunities we have for contact and diversity of those contacts. It's like, okay, if you're in school, you're hanging out with them every day and you're doing different stuff. You're like going to the mall, or you're going over here, or you're in class and you're bored and you need them. And so you have a lot of opportunities for contact and interaction. Mm-hmm. And today it's like, okay, I meet someone at a networking thing and I get their card and I may never contact them again. But if I keep seeing them at the same conferences, say DEF CON or Black Hat, we go every year. And there's some people that go every year. I go every year. And some of these people I now list them on people I can contact, even though I just met them at a conference, and most people I meet at a conference I never talk to again, but because I have these repeat contacts. And so it's like someone, went out of their way to facilitate additional opportunities for us to interact and realize that we have things in common. Mm-hmm. And over time, those things add up into a larger connection. I think that's really, for me, what it is.
Yeah, I've read some similar things, a number of connections, and also number of times we've been in arguments. It should be a ratio, and the ratio should be fairly low, but not zero.
Yeah.
I don't think we've had any serious arguments, but we've certainly kind of like, well, what do you think about this? And we've kind of got into it, not in a negative sense, but just not necessarily agreeing on every single topic.
Yeah, I lean a little left. You lean a little right.
Ever so slightly, but not really. I mean, on certain issues, I'd say economically, kind of. Mm-hmm. A lot of social issues, no. So I'm pretty dead center, but these days dead center can look an awful lot like an absolute Nazi to a certain cohort. Yeah. So it's a little hard to say, but I would say that either side sees that I'm not on their side, which is kind of how you're pretty much dead center.
That's the detriment of being a moderate, is everybody hates you.
Yeah, everybody hates me.
You're Switzerland.
But I'm also looking for who's right on any given issue, because I really think that there's certain issues that both sides have gotten better. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily right, but better than the other side. Yeah. And there's a lot of issues where I don't think either side even sees that there's a middle ground. They don't even see, it's like invisible to them. And I think that that's worth spending time on. And so that gets me in a lot of arguments, like pretty heated arguments with people. And at the end of those arguments, one of two things happen. Either they go, it was sport. It was fun. I learned something, and they really enjoyed it, and we're friends. We're fast friends. Mm-hmm. Or they go, that guy's a jerk. I hate that guy, and it's over. And very quickly, I have this insanely good set of friends who are willing to get into these more complex conversations and spend the time necessary. And I'm not going to be right 100% of the time, and they're not going to be right 100% of the time. And I'd rather know from my friends when I'm wrong than just be spouting off random stuff all the time. So I think it's worth it. I think it's worth it to be a little
challenging.
Challenging. Yeah. Coming up with bold assumptions. Prove me wrong about this. Yeah. Not because I want to be wrong, but I want to make sure that I'm right.
Right. I think there's probably a personality trait, because you can meet those people who, I don't have an opinion on any of it. They don't really interest me all that much. Mm-hmm. People that really don't have an opinion on anything. They're the floaters. They float through life. Mm-hmm. You also have the dogmatic folks that are like, party line. I have to be an apologist. I don't really like those people either. They annoy me a lot, because I'll bring something up. I'll even like offer an olive branch of like, yeah, I hate that Trump guy, but he did a good thing right there. And I'll offer it as an olive branch.
Oh, you definitely are a Nazi. What are you doing?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, how could you do that? We're supposed to destroy them. So
this actually drives me crazy. I mean, obviously Trump has done one good thing in his life. Like,
I'm sure
he chose not to do one thing he could have done that was horrible at one point in his life. Does that mean he's a good person? Obviously not. Mm-hmm. Hitler, I am sure, did one thing one time that was not horrible. And does that make him a good person? No. But like, if you take people holistically and look at them across the board, you're obviously going to find one thing about anybody who you can go, yeah, they're an okay person in this one regard or whatever.
in this instance.
In this one specific scenario, but that is not how to think about the world, you know. Yeah. And
it also, I've been thinking about this a lot, like the Kanye thing with Hitler, you know, or some of these other people who are like, why would you spend your time defending someone, even if they were right in that context, who's a terrible person? And that's what they talk about with Trump. Like my friends on their heavy left, far left, will say, why even offer the olive branch? Why even acknowledge he did something right when he's done so much wrong and he's getting away with it? Mm-hmm. You know, so that's their context, is like, we're at war. Why are you apologizing for something they did right? Or, you know, extending that olive branch.
So what about the people who are apologists who give an olive branch and say this person's, you know, he didn't screw up in every single regard?
Yeah, I think right now we are in this war context where if you give an olive branch and say this person who, you know, this group believes is bad and who's done a bunch of things and is getting away with it, if you extend that olive branch and say, well, they were right in this context, or they were right in this instance, and we have to give them a point. Granting them that point when they're getting away with so much of this other negative stuff, and we've totally, you know, we've made the decision they're a bad person, you're going to get attacked for that if we're in this war context. And I think that's the way we should think about this, is like, we're currently in a context where we don't want to let people do that. And it sucks for us who have more critical thinking, and we have a little bit of a separation from it to be like, it's not going to end the world for me to even discuss the good aspect.
Sure.
But when we're at war, it seems like a distraction that needs to be stopped.
I mean, I sympathize, because if you really, really believe that this is life or death for your cohort of people or your friend group or people who you think are marginalized or whatever, mm-hmm. what wouldn't you do to save the impoverished or the needy or whatever? And anything you do that isn't directionally helping them out is tantamount to just saying, throwing them right in the dumpster, or, you know, mm-hmm. leading them into the fire, or whatever analogy you want to use. So I get it, but it also means that they're intentionally limiting their exposure to facts that might actually help them in their own war. Like, if you don't know that your adversary did something good, then you're not going to know why a bunch of people are following them. So you're not going to know why, like, certain words are just not going to work with them.
It's like a know your enemy thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, before I started this podcast, maybe 2 years before or something, I have not talked about this publicly at all. I basically spent some time thinking, you know, me, a hacker, I have a lot of capability. I could probably make any outcome happen. I really, really felt like a lot of these systems are actually pretty frail. And also people are pretty easy to manipulate, and a bunch of other things, right? I was thinking, like, as a hacker, what could I do to overturn elections? And I've looked at election systems and they're not particularly great. So I was thinking, well, but what would I do? Let's say I decided to do that one day. I'm like, oh, I'll just flip a switch and I'm going to go do the thing. What would I do? Well, I realized very quickly I didn't have enough information to even make that assumption. I had to know both sides well enough to know if I had to pick one of two sides, because there's really only two sides, let's be honest, which side would I pick and why? And how would I justify, how would I make the moral justification that I would switch the direction in one way or another? And that set me down a journey of exploration. I'm like, I don't know enough. I need to know way more about everything. Like, doesn't matter what the topic is, just I gotta be unscared of new information. You know, some things can be daunting. You're like, wow, that's a very deep topic. That'll take a long time to become an expert in. I'm just going to buckle down and just spend the time to learn whatever I need to learn to get to the point where I actually have a relatively, compared to the average person anyway, informed opinion about just about anything that's going to come my way.
If the decision could be yours.
If the decision could be mine. Not to say I would ever actually do this, but as an exercise to know more about my own position, I had to assume that eventually I might come to a place where I had to make a decision. And if I had to, which decision would I make? And that I don't think enough people spend enough time thinking about that specific, like, if you actually had to flip the switch and turn off half the country and, like, just say don't get to vote anymore because we can't trust you to vote because you're doing bad things to people, which side would you pick and why? And it has to be not just because my team wins. I mean, it has to be a much more deeper understanding of what that leads to and what's the outcome if that were to occur. And
But I think it's even a flawed way to go about it, because these, like, the parties that we have to choose from are highly complex, and they're kind of big tent, you know, and it's like, could I say that one is worse or better than the other? And that's fairly complex.
If you had to,
Yes.
is a better question, as opposed to, you know, I would want to. See, I don't want to do that. But if I was put in the position where I was sitting on the switch and it had to go left or go right, I would have a really hard time doing that, because there are certain things I like about both groups, and I don't feel like one side is so sufficiently wildly better than the other that it would be worth switching them off.
This is the microcosm of the individual decision every person makes in that polling booth, is like, should I research this, or should I go tribal and say my team versus your team? And, you know, I think that there's a fundamental aspect of democracy that requires you to assume both sides want the country to be better, and we have lost that. And I don't know if democracy can function in a realm where I don't believe both sides want better things, and that they just have different ways to do it. You know, it's like, well, if you're Switzerland and you're trying to choose between the Axis powers and the Allies, and you're like, well, I see good things on both sides. Screw you. We're at war. Like, I'm not going to give you a platform to go say things like that. Like, they're the Huns, you know, they're all demons. You know, it's much better if we believe that the enemy are demons.
Sure.
To fight a war. It's hard to fight a war when I think, well, that person has a family too, and they could be just like me if they had been born here. We have to get rid of that if we're fighting a war.
So literally dehumanize.
Dehumanize.
Yeah.
And I think we've reached that point. And it's really hard to maintain a democracy when you dehumanize the enemy.
Right.
And the enemy is your
So this is
neighbor.
the basket of deplorables, or the groomers. This is how we describe our enemies.
Yeah.
And I mean, there might be a kernel of truth in any epithet you could come up with, and yet, like, I don't see for me the upside in ignoring both sides or either side. I have to just assume that all of these people are coming from, as you said, some iota of good faith somewhere buried in there. Now, there are bad actors on both sides, true bad actors, and they're a minority, but they absolutely exist.
Yep.
And they will seed the battlefield with bad data and seed it with propaganda that they know will have an outcome that is negative. But they are actually fairly few and far between, and the vast majority of people are just following orders of the meme that they read or whatever. You know, they're just right in line with whatever, you know, podcast or, you know, meme factory that just decided to put that in front of them. So I think this is actually quite an important topic, probably more for me, more important than just about any other. Which is understanding why I think what I think, and making sure that the data I get is at least directionally correct, if not perfectly correct. If I can't get perfectly correct, at least do the research and try to figure out directionally which way should I go.
Yeah. And I think I'm a better person because I expose myself to other opinions. You know, some people that are just like, I'm tribal, I'm blocking you if you don't agree with me. We're at war and this affects me. Like, I understand that. Like, you know, I have friends that some of these decisions, like the abortion decision, that are very, very core to like their safety, doesn't affect me as much. So I'm allowed to have more diverse opinions. Not allowed, but I have more diverse opinions because it's not a personal situation for me. I haven't had to make any decision like that. So but at the same time, you know, I've gone back and forth on this. Should I care more and listen to the people who are impacted by it and adopt their opinion? Or should I maintain my neutrality because I'm not involved and listen to both sides and figure out why they believe what they believe?
I think initially neutrality is the right answer.
Initially.
But over time, obviously you're going to learn things about both sides and have opinions. And you mentioned abortion. This is a topic that is super sensitive and probably not one that two guys should be having.
Probably not.
But not because, but not because we can't have opinions, but because I'd rather have a woman in the room who can also have her opinion at the same time and inform us idiots who've never had to go through anything like that or even consider having to go through that personally. But it's not that I don't have opinions, and it's not that I haven't had very complex thoughts. In fact, probably more complex than how a lot of the current narratives are, from what I can gather anyway. And confusing narratives, things that in my mind lead me down paths that I wouldn't have expected to land. When I started the exercise, I would have thought I'd end up somewhere different. And maybe someday I'll get into all that, but I just don't think it's worth this conversation to do that. But I think that all of these things that we discuss, you should be prepared to end up on the other side. If you're not prepared to end up on the other side, you're not doing it with an open mind. And I really like that about you, as I think that you are one of those people who can end up on the other side.
I find value in it. I've gone back and forth a lot. I've asked myself the question, like, is neutrality good? Like, is that a virtue? And in some cases it's not. There are cases where bad things are happening and your neutrality is causing those bad things to continue. But in other cases, especially in complex cases, complex topics, I tend towards neutrality, and not neutrality, but I tend towards wanting to understand both sides and empathizing with why they believe that, especially if it's two strong opinions. If it's just like an oppressor, beating down a slave, that's an obvious power mismatch. But when it's two groups that appear to be equally powerful, disagreeing on a topic, in those cases, I want to be the neutral party and figure out why they believe what they believe so that I can understand both sides. I think that is an advantageous thing to be, and not just choose a side. But I've also gone back and forth on that. Like, when would I choose a side? When would I look at both these cases and be like, yep, I'm not going to sit on the sidelines. I'm going to take up my banner and I'm going to fight for one of them. Even though I know there's a little piece of right in the other side, let's ignore that. We're going to war. When would I do that? And under what criteria? That's an open question I have.
Ditto.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I don't want to get into too much more because we're already hitting some time here, but let's just pick one of them, wokeism, since it was on your list.
Yeah, I did not facilitate that one.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe we'll skip that one. What about judging the past?
Judging the past. That was an interesting one. And that was fairly timely because over the last few years we've been discussing, whether we should be having statues of certain people when we know, he was a slave owner. We have to take the statue down. We can't put them on a pedestal anymore because now our morality has changed and they were not a good person according to the lens we have today.
That's called presentism.
So that whole discussion was on that topic specifically, was like, let's actually dig into that some more. Like, let's actually figure out, what's your opinions on this? Should we be looking at the past through the lens of current morality? Should we grant them some leeway because, treating women like trash and treating slaves like trash was like okay back then. So, they can still be heroes. Like, what's right? I think we have a political conversation happening at the national level. Let's have a personal conversation. That's what Thinkers and Drinkers is about, is like, okay, we've seen the online arguments. Let's put the talking points away for a second and just talk about it.
I like this topic. I personally don't care about a single statue anywhere. I don't care. Whatever, get rid of them all. It doesn't matter to me whatsoever. But I know that other people would care. And so that's why I care, I guess, if that makes sense. And I guess the answer is, that I've heard that I probably resonate the most with is some researcher, or maybe it was a journalist of some sort. He was basically saying, whether you agree that the statue should be there or not, what you're missing, the context you're missing, is that someone at some point thought that this was something that needed to be commemorated from their perspective. And what you're really doing by honoring this thing, whatever this thing is, not to say that you agree with the person or like the statuette or whatever, is that whoever put it there felt the need to do that because it was so strong within them and their community or whatever. And what you're really witnessing is a point in time where they they were willing to pool the resources together and literally remove real estate from functional real estate from the world and leverage that to say something to history. And what you're really saying is, I don't want to learn whatever they wanted to teach me. And does that make sense? And if the answer is yes, then go ahead, get rid of it. But if you want the knowledge to still exist, it's very similar to a book. You could get rid of the book. You could burn all the books, and then you wouldn't have any of those books that had that one bad idea in them. But whoever wrote that was trying to have this thing echo through time, and it's your choice whether you read it or not. You don't have to read it, or you can hate it or whatever. But is it worth getting rid of these things? And Trump, for all of his bad things he's done, one of the good things he did was say that if you take down this one statue, you're going to start seeing people take down presidents as well. And everyone's like, no, that's crazy. You're crazy. And of course they did. I think everybody who had any sense about them knew that was going to happen, actually. But but a lot of people really, really wanted to believe that there was no way that would ever occur, and this is all hyperbolic. And that was one he definitely got right. I think the reason I knew it was going to happen for sure, like definitely, is this sort of the same reason we see, like, the Shia Muslims, taking down statues or whatever. It doesn't fit their narrative. It doesn't fit with their sense of the world. And the more you can remove of your opposition, the better. Yeah,
I think history, we've talked about it, that this culture war we are in, history is a large component of it, and our heroes are a large component of it. If we want to change the culture, and we're in this war of whether we should change it or we should go backwards to a better time or whatever, or should we progress to the next phase and we have to blow up the old to usher in the new. That's this culture war we're in right now, and that has a heavy component with history, and we have to. If we want that change to occur, if one group wants that change to occur, then they have to go take down the statues of the people we used to claim are heroes. We have to downgrade them. They're no longer our heroes. These are our heroes because this is what we want to be. And I think whenever you think of your heroes or statues or even historical figures that are really important that we want to go and frame and put a picture on, I think we've done something wrong by trying to take them apart and say, well, we learned this bad thing about them, therefore we shouldn't laud them as heroes. There's bad things about everybody.
Absolutely everybody.
And one of the things I've
hacked into enough people's email addresses, I can guarantee it.
Right. And I think that there's a reason why we make statues of them and we don't add them at 4K, resolution. The busts are made more perfect than their actual skin was, or their, the narrative we write is not, it doesn't have the blemishes of real life. And we do that for a reason, because they're heroes, because we don't want to laud them for their bad parts. So we remove the bad parts from the history so that we can then make them heroes and aspire to be them without convoluting and having our kids look at this bad thing that they did and say, I need to be like him, so I need to do the bad thing too. No, let's just remove the bad thing from the histories and we laud them as perfect. Yep, they weren't. Well,
and also the bad things are almost all, not in all cases, but in many, many cases are totally irrelevant to
what they did.
So it's the major historical thing that they were involved in.
Yeah.
So why are we even talking? It's like they went to the restroom too. I don't care. Yeah. It's irrelevant to the fact that they won some battle or whatever, it's, I think this is a fairly silly conversation. And it also means that so many things are going to have to get rewritten. Like literally the entire language is going to have to be rewritten.
If that's our standard. If our standard is they have to be perfect in order for them to be heroes.
Right.
But, then even on the very, the far left that wants to change out all of these statues, they have heroes that aren't perfect either. Like Che Guevara, like all these guys.
Oh yeah,
they had some crazy stuff going on. Should we take that same lens?
Yeah, right.
Everybody has heroes, and I think that we have. I believe that you should remove the negative aspects of our heroes after a certain amount of time, so that we are propping up the traits and the attributes that we want to idolize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is where Hollywood gets involved. Yeah. So now you get to say, well, I'm just going to make up this idol with no character flaws. It's going to be perfect. And that's boring. Superman. It's boring. Yeah. It's really boring. I mean, if they have zero things ever, no conflict whatsoever, it's honestly not fun to watch.
That's why we like Batman.
Yeah.
He's not perfect.
Yeah. Or the Punisher. Extra not perfect.
Right.
You know what I mean? So from your Facebook feed, I went back and looked at one of the more recent comments you made. You make some very good sort of provocational sort of comments sometimes, and I like reading it. I don't comment on them, but I like reading other people's comments on it.
You don't want to be in the 400 replies?
No, I do like watching people's replies, though. Yeah. I learn a lot about people and how they're going to react. I'm a lurker on many, many, many channels because I actually enjoy seeing how people interact with one another, and yours in particular is a high one on my feed. So you said, and this is paraphrasing a lot because it's a long post, said, I see the Elon Musk Twitter controversy less and less as a left versus right division. It's an authoritarian versus laissez-faire thing, a free speech versus content policing thing, moderates versus extremists. So I, for one, very much agree with that. I don't think I've seen like the political aisle described as right and left, and I've also seen it kind of squished together where the extreme right and left are actually together and moderates are over here. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I think that's right. If you look at extreme right and extreme left, they both basically have the same goal, which is power.
And they use the same tactics.
Yeah, very similar.
We'll denounce one side, will denounce the other side for using a tactic that they then go and use themselves. So for instance, like that comment specifically, and if I'm being honest, like I've always held Elon Musk as someone that I admired. I think he's a little.
Well, you have a Tesla.
Now. Yeah, I do have a Tesla. So given that, I do look at it a lens from like, okay, he can't be, this evil person that that some of these guys are reading about what's actually going on here. And then looking at my personal groups that I am engaged with, the Thinkers and Riggers group, I'll talk to them and I'll say like, what's the consensus at least here? I know it's not scientific, it's not a large population, but at least I have a fairly diverse set of friends. I can get a little bit on like what's the actual thing going on without just going to CNN and saying, hey, they all hate him. Mm-hmm. And so more and more of those
Fox,
conversations,
they all love them.
Yeah. So more and more of those conversations that I have interpersonally, one-on-one, are not looking like the conversation that's happening on the news. And that's interesting to me because that national narrative is, right wing versus left wing. The personal narratives that I'm hearing are more about, should we police content really heavily? Or should we be more free and let people do whatever they want? Or where's the line? It used to be the line was just child pornography. That's it. That's the only line. If you have that, we'll police it. Otherwise, do whatever you want. Versus
or propositioning to kill the president or something, actual crime. Yeah.
So, and you see this in Europe. The European laws are like, you can't be laissez-faire. You're breaking the law by allowing people to talk about whatever they want. And I'm like, is that right? And from their perspective, they're like, you are enabling people who are bad people to say bad things and incite more bad things against vulnerable groups. Mm-hmm. Okay, I feel that. I don't want that to happen. But it's is that moral ground that we have to police this content on a very, very large network really what we want to do? Right.
Well, I certainly think that we probably should stay away from censorship because it's got a chilling effect. And I don't think I can come up with a single example where absolute censorship has ended well for whichever country has implemented it.
It actually pushes people into more extremes, which causes more conflict.
Right. And it also leads very quickly to authoritarianism and oligarchies and all kinds of terrible things. So I think you're right on the money here with this comment. So how How do you see this going? I mean, how do you see this conversation? And I don't mean this specific one, these sets of conversation going. How do we have this conversation at a more global level and get people thinking more in context of both sides might have something to offer this conversation?
I think that one of the things that's made at least the conversation happening, these conversations happening in a interpersonal level and at like our Thinkers and Drinkers meetups at a local level, one of the things that makes those conversations tend to be more successful is by reframing. When you get to the national level, framing is everything. We're going to frame this as this versus this or red versus blue, and we can't have conversations outside of that context because the national conversation is propagated. Mm-hmm. And so, I don't know. I think I don't know the answer, but I do know that our biggest problem at the national level conversation is the fact that it's propagated so fast and that the framing has to be very simple for a large audience. And outside that frame, it's too complex. And so there are disruptors that come along and can help us change that framing. What is the national conversation happening? Someone comes along with a new idea or a loud enough message or a big enough broadcast where they can change the national conversation and the framing of that to be something else. I think that's more powerful than trying to figure out who's going to win left versus right.
Sure. Well, maybe it can be your next question for your next Thinkers and Drinkers. Like, how do we reframe it? I mean, I remember talking to a couple of very right-leaning, or I would say halfway right anyway, about this topic. And they're like, well, we're losing, the culture war. And I'm like, your memes suck. Like your memes are terrible. Like you think they're funny, but the left doesn't think they're funny at all. Like you gotta cross the aisle. And they're like, well, how do we do that? I'm like, do you know what they think? Have you talked to them? Have you actually sat down with anybody in the left for like in the last year, let's say? And like, well, I don't really have any left friends. Well, there you go. That's why you're losing.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what the other half is thinking. I would say the same thing about the left. It's like, if you're talking about taking away guns, you should probably know what a gun like works like to talk to somebody on the right and say, well, I don't like that specific gun. What is that? What kind of gun is that? I can't even tell you. It's scary. Like you're not going to be able to, the language is all messed up. They just don't know what each other is saying.
And we're seeing just to take it back to that Twitter thing, it's like when you institute censorship, it pushes people into a network of just their people, and then when Elon took over Twitter, and he banned those journalists, which was a terrible decision in my mind. They said, oh, we're being censored now. We're going to go to Mastodon, like our network. And now you have two groups of angry people who don't understand the other side in their own bubble.
Who literally can't see each other.
They can't see each other. This is not going to get better.
Right.
With that model.
Right. So you are also a board member of a company that helps people find jobs. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm a board member of Marivis. Marivis is a nonprofit, and it basically does boutique training. And so the concept there, I was actually I was not a founding member or anything like that, but I joined the organization. It was originally started in Austin and Seattle, so really operated out of those two places, and they're a veteran service organization. So they take veterans and offer a training pipeline to get them switched over from carrying a rifle to working in a cloud career.
They're basically the same thing.
Basically the same. Like clouds, rifles, marching, you're being rained on. But it's been really awesome to see that, because I came out of the military having significant skills in cybersecurity and IT, and I was able to transition very well. Watching some of my friends who did not have that training, who were in these careers that have no civilian equivalent, that makes it very, very difficult to get out. In fact, even like right now, economy's a little bit tough. A friend of mine retired from the military, and he sent out over 4 months, probably 100 different applications, and he had 23 years military experience and couldn't get a bite. That's tough. And that experience doesn't translate over. And in fact, the jobs that he was being...
Can you tell me what he was applying for?
Different things. That was they were like IT and things like that. But he worked on missiles and satellites and satellite communication networks. There's a few civilian jobs out there that do that.
There are a few. Comcast, Verizon.
But like that, having on your resume, you did IT communications, even if it did translate, a lot of the recruiters are like, we don't need a satellite guy. I got Cisco routers. Well, actually, he works on Cisco routers too. It's just, he worked for the military. But he had a hard time because that, even like writing a resume and translating that experience into a commercial is hard. Like there are routes to do it and there's ways to do it, but you don't always have those resources. And so, seeing that, I joined Merivis specifically to help them, raise money, expand what they're doing, but they're heavy in the Salesforce ecosystem right now. And Salesforce is a huge, huge technology ecosystem. They're used in every organization, I think. Approximately every organization. And doing things like analytics, sales, you name it, people use their cloud infrastructure to do it. And so that is a skill set they were training into and they had a lot of experience in. So they were able to take cohorts of hundreds of veterans and train them into a technology career for a technology stack that the military 100% does not use. They don't use Salesforce to, fight wars.
No.
And they're going to have zero exposure to it. And so this is one of the few pipelines. And there's a Salesforce is, since Merivis started, Salesforce has done a very good job of seeing that as a good pipeline to train people in. So that has built it over the years. That is now a huge pipeline for them, is taking military folks into Salesforce, which is a career that they would never have without these pipelines. So I'm working with them right now to expand what they're doing, how many veterans they actually can support, because there's a lot of need. And then second, expanding the organization into more technology careers in the cloud, because these types of careers you're not going to get exposure in most careers in the military.
Yeah. Well, that's great. So how do people get in touch with you, Chris? How do you find you in Thinkers and Drinkers and Merivis?
Well, I am on Twitter. I'm not super active. I do actually most
anymore
of my...
or at ever.
Yeah, I'm on there. Gerritz C or C Gerritz is usually what I go by on there. And then if you want to engage on my political stuff, I keep that private on Facebook, where all my political conversations, keep them on Facebook. That's where I think it deserves to stay. I have some really lively ones on there.
Yes, we do.
So it really depends on what engagement you want to do. But yeah, I think Twitter's the easiest for like the random.
And Thinkers and Drinkers?
Thinkers and Drinkers, Instagram, heavy. We have 6 different groups. Austin, in the States here, it's going to be Austin, Denver, San Antonio, and Portland. And our Instagram is really active on showing what we're doing week to week. We're on the Meetup app. So if you want to come to one of ours and here in Austin, you can do that. If you're in Denver, you can go to the Denver group. They meet on Mondays, Tuesdays for Austin.
And Merivis?
Merivis, online, merivis.org. And we do a Merivis mixer in Austin every year during Veterans Day, actually twice a year, one for Memorial Day as well. So those are our big in-persons. And we're starting to do a lot more in-person after the pandemic. We kind of put a lot of that on pause.
Well, Chris, this has been great. I really appreciate having you on here. And I look forward to maybe we do this again. Maybe we'll grab some more really heavy topics and try to tackle them.
Yeah, we should just do the Thinkers and Drinkers stuff. We've got some good ones.
I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah. Thanks, Robert.
Yeah.